afternoon. We're back in session and we'll begin our afternoon work with the Government and Community Affairs Committee led by Mr. Wendell Hall. Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wendell Hall, Chair of the Governmental and Community Affairs Committee, along with Co-Chair Jill Hammett. At this point in time, we will have an update on legislative priorities presented by members of the DPI staff. I understand that Dr. Mark is going to start the process with us. Hopefully we will hear something also about the math project and CARES that's now Thrive.
Yes, sir.
It's the turn forward, but I'm going to leave it up to you to go from there.
All right, thank you, sir. Good afternoon. Thank you. Yes, so I'm going to give an update on the math comprehensive reform for mathematics, and then Dr. Gibbs will give his update on Thrive, I believe it's called, and then Ms. Ryan will cover literacy. Yep.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so I believe a number of these slides you all have already seen, but I'm happy to continue to kind of go back through some of this information if you'd like, but I also want to be mindful of your time and energy. So, part of our ask here is around reforming mathematics. As you know, we've spent a lot of funds and a lot of time on early grades literacy. We're seeing a lot of good results from that work, and we really want to begin to transition now and thinking really hard about K-8 mathematics in particular and how we are going to better prepare kids for Math 1 by 9th grade. And so Dr. Aiken and I have worked with the math team to develop a set of recommendations going forward around comprehensive math. And really the idea is we want to change this culture around mathematics and the thinking around mathematics, and that, I think you've heard us say before, people kind of lose their mind if somebody were to say, I'm not literate, but if you say I'm not good at math, people seem to be okay with that. And we really want to change that. And so how does this all kind of come to the fore? Well, certainly, as you know, our math data over the last decade has really been flat. Student performance has not improved significantly. It's not declined significantly over time. We did see that kind of bump in the road there during COVID. Pretty significant decline in math. We've started to rebound, but again, rebounding to this sort of sense of the middle. And so that's our kind of recent math. We see the same thing here in grade 8 and in high school, kind of flat performance, and again, not the kind of performance that we would really be proud of at this point, right? Again, our NAEP data, so that's our state level data. Our NAEP data, which compares us to the rest of the nation, we'd seen some improvement over time, but then once again, flat, and then even probably more importantly, we have persistent student group gaps, right? And so in order for us to address these gaps in student groups, we have to be really mindful about the kinds of recommendations we put forward that address mathematics for all children. Okay. One of the bright spots in our math in the state, and which I think we would all be happy to point to, is our advanced math legislation. So the idea here is that we wanted to broaden access and participation regardless of student background. And Ms. Shaw Coltrane presented this to the board, I believe, a month ago, the data, and it's very clear that we're serving our highest performing students pretty well. We're identifying students who should be placed in advanced math classes. They're being placed in math classes. We'd like to see that expand perhaps to some other subjects. But ideally, students at the top, we seem to be serving well. Students in the middle and at the bottom there, not so much. And so that's going to become our next focus. So the timeline, as you know, math standards, the current math standards were implemented in stages. So we started in 2016-17, K-8 went into effect 18-19, and then Math 4 not till 2021. We're working to get all of this back on that kind of single timeline. So that's part of the work that's happening now. The math standards team is in the review phase, so 24-25, looking what's happening across the country and in math. And so any recommendations for revision will not be brought to the board until next summer. And so that's the point at which we would engage in that formal process. Now, I think what we would express is that feels like a long time away. That sort of is. And we really need to get to work on math prior to new standards being put into place. And we can do that work without kind of having, a major revision in our standards. Just to remind you of some work that we've already begun. So we partnered, of course, with Carnegie and WestEd and received the PRISM grant, which we talked about, I believe, back in January. So again, a 5-year, $7 million, almost $8 million grant from the U.S. Department of Education. And this is really to provide professional development to 300 rural fourth grade math teachers, looking to serve about 7,000 students in this kind of professional learning experience to really help bolster kind of teacher development, right, and teacher understanding of math concepts. And so we want to build on that work, and so that we'll move into our kind of our request and in this idea of using Patterns. So Patterns is the program inside of the PRISM grant. It's been successfully used in 19 other states. It's really flexible. It's a flexible professional development program. Combines both kind of self-paced with some online coaching, which we know is critical. Okay. So this is a 5-year grant, as I mentioned. We are currently in the recruitment phase of the project, and so that'll happen up through the summer with more full implementation in January of 2025. And so again, we will have some results year over year. We'll come back to the board, kind of share what's happening as that kind of transpires, including district recruitment. So we have had a number of districts already reach out to us with some interest in being participants in the grant, so we're excited that districts are also interested in this work as we move forward. Okay, so our Math 1, or our comprehensive math proposal, really focused on this idea of ensuring that all students are prepared for Math 1 and prepared for Math 1 by 9th grade. And so this takes some kind of policy recommendations in addition to some other kind of practical work around teacher professional development and technology. So what we are looking for is to ensure that all students have access to 60 minutes of daily math instruction on or above grade level, okay, in order to build their proficiency and their fluency. And then that, looking for PSU boards to help facilitate math support and intervention programs, and then again, engaging parents and caregivers in this work as we move forward. Okay, so some of our strategies include instructional materials. The math team has already built out a rubric that districts would be able to use to align their math materials to the North Carolina Standard Course of Study, which we know has a direct impact on student performance. Aligning your materials to the standards does in fact lead to better performance. We're also looking for a system of support for educators. So again, that's this kind of embedded professional development that's kind of blended and meets the needs of both teachers and students. And then assessment and program monitoring, which would include a diagnostic to ensure that we have a better sense of where kids are, and then to align interventions to the exact needs of students, right? As opposed to, there's an analogy I like to use here. I mean, if you've ever watched Netflix, right, and you watch a series, and you don't have to watch every episode leading up to the latest one. You can do the summary, like they give you a little recap, right? You don't need to know it all. You need to know the parts you missed. And so often what we do now is we say, well, this student is below grade level in math, and then we try to assign them all the math at the below grade level. Well, they know some of that math. We need to give them the work that they don't have, those foundational pieces, and that's really what we're trying to push toward. Okay. So again, strategies include parent notification. So this is, again, ensuring that parents are aware, building off of the work in literacy. We've done a lot of work trying to ensure that parents had a good sense of where kids were with their literacy instruction plans. We want to make sure we have that for math as well. And then math instruction intervention, I'll talk a little bit more about that, and the Innovative Math Accelerator grant program, which we're asking for. Okay. So our total cost here is, we have a long session asked for math coaches. We'd really like to get involved in the work, get a year of data, and then come back and ask for math coaches, which will cost somewhere around $15 million. Again, building on the experience of the literacy work, we know how important coaches are, right? I actually had a question at the General Assembly about coaches, and my response is, the best professional athletes in the world have all kinds of coaches. So to suggest that teachers don't also need coaches is certainly we need coaches. We need academic coaches to support our teachers. A mathematics screener, so $4 million for a screener to help us use as a diagnostic, as a tool in the same way that we currently use MClass or DIBELS. And then lastly is the Innovative Math Accelerator Grant Program. So this is an $8 million ask. And this is to build on the work of the PRISM grant. And what we'd like to do is extend the PRISM work into middle grades. And this would allow us to do that beginning as early as the fall with school leaders. And then teachers would follow shortly after in the spring. Okay? And so that's, in essence, that's the math. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. If not, and then I'll turn it over to Ms. Ryan. All right. Yes, sir.
The PRISM grant, what's the timeline on that becoming available and how do LEAs get involved?
Yeah, so currently, so we're in the recruitment phase, and so we've got LEAs have been reaching out to Dr. Aiken for participation. I believe we're looking at perhaps an early cohort in the fall, but it'll be smaller than the regular. We're actually that work's slated to start probably in January of next year. I believe that's correct. I can follow up and make sure.
Thank you very much. My question goes back to your ask, not about the ask in terms of dollars, but your math coaches. Are you providing, or do you plan to provide any guidance to the school districts with regard to what to look for in a highly qualified math coach? Because the data that we've heard over the last number of years is that we just don't have enough math teachers coming out of our EPPs.
Yes, so that is, Dr. Oxnine, that is absolutely correct. So one of the challenges and one of the reasons we really are trying to take this PD approach is we know particularly in the middle school, finding really highly effective math teachers is difficult. And as you know, having worked in EPPs, right, the number of alternatively licensed folks, trying to get them some really good practical pedagogical skill, right? And so kind of bolstering that. I'm kind of giving you the long answer, but perhaps the short answer is there are some programs inside the state of North Carolina. We do have several EPPs that run essentially math coaching programs, and we know that there is some effectiveness of those particular math coaches inside of the schools. So we do have a model already in the state that we could certainly learn more from. But yes, to your question, we would certainly be building out a set of recommendations or guidance in the same way that we've done the early literacy coaches.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well,
All right.
yes, sir.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Good afternoon. So as we talk about literacy and where we're headed next, our goal on the next slide will tell you that we're trying to focus on expanding to expand beyond grade 3 through grade 8 to support literacy. So if you look at the next slide, you'll see that the data shows that when we put supports in place, you see the increase from grade 3 to grade 4 based on the supports and the amount of supports that they have and pathways, and then it will begin to decline or flatline throughout grade 8. So based on that and what we've learned from early literacy in the recent release of Ed's Early Literacy Matters, their policy, North Carolina is a national model, and we have implemented 18 out of 18 fundamental principles in early literacy. They're either fully or partially implemented, and we're the only state that has done that to date. There are 2 other states that have 18 out of 18 fundamental principles, but they are in the future that they'll be implemented. Not all 18 are actually being implemented. So North Carolina is the only one doing that, and we have a couple best practices in place. So we've started with what's going well and what lessons have we learned as we're thinking about moving forward with our secondary supports. So as we look ahead, some of the proposals that we're asking for would be to expand the current Excellent Public Schools Act legislation. If you look at the Virginia Act, their Reading Act, they have done that. They have done this very thing. And so we would, based on our data, know that we need not all children move at the same rate or the same pace. So our goal would be to ask that we, in the proposal, that we offer Lexia Aspire for all 6th through 8th grade content teachers. That includes ELA, science, social studies, and math teachers. They have different pathways for each of those, as well as if you're an interventionist or an administrator. It's approximately $600. It's self-paced modules. It's not a 2-year course, and it doesn't require all the extra things. It is a self-paced module, or self-paced modules, unlike what we have with letters. So that will require some support from us, of course. And that's about a $14 million ask based on the 23,000 educators. One thing we have learned since then is they have a 2-year license that's $699, which might save districts some time. And when you think about staggering implementation, what that might look like for us to consider, should it be approved at General Assembly. And then, of course, changing that legislation possibly to consider secondary teachers in the EPP legislation for that pipeline. Other requests would include the literacy instruction standards. While academic standards has done a great job with providing that pre-K through 12, to have that in legislation written beyond grade 3 would be very helpful. So we want to include them in the support for our literacy instruction standards, as well as literacy intervention plans and individual reading plans. Because if you're going to support a child, it helps to have that plan in place to know what interventions have taken place and what's working and what's not working, rather than starting over every year with a new teacher. But if we're going to ask for literacy intervention plans to be in place for those to include through grade 8, then of course we would seek for funding to support that. And the way we've looked at this model is if-then. So General Assembly, when they look at it, they realize if I spend this, then we get this. If I spend this, then we get this. So they have choices. So, in the next expansion, we're also going to be looking at professional development. They would need support from the state. So Office of Early Learning and Academic Standards will be included in the ask for the Aspire training for support there. And the funding, the model would also include a district contact. We didn't have that in early literacy. So that might be something to consider, as well as a school champion. It might be an administrator, it might be a coach, it might be an interventionist. The school would have a choice, but who is their champion or their point of contact at their school, as well as EC and EL, based on what we learned from early literacy. And then some additional asks would also include a support structure. Currently, we have regional consultants for early literacy, but there are none for secondary. So we need to consider what that looks like. That framework's been very helpful when we have our consultants meeting with coaches and with districts. And so we need to think about the tiered framework also if we're going to ask them to do the training, who's going to support it beyond just checking off professional development. And then considering bonuses. We heard that from the field. We continue to hear that. So what might that look like if you're going to offer that, and what it would cost for each layer, whether it's teachers, the champions, the district, ECEL, what that cost looks like. And then last but not least, of course, we are also going to ask for the formative assessment DIBELS, the statewide assessment, to be expanded to grades 4 and 5, so we can continue to monitor and align it with our letters, coursework and what's happening there, and also including our charters. We currently have 80 charters, 116 charters who are taking advantage of Amplify in the state contract, but we have 80 who are not. And it doesn't mean they can't use local assessments. Our LEAs do the same. They use the statewide assessment, but they also have local assessments. So how can we include charters into this, so it's PSUs in the language, so we have statewide data for all of our public schools, and they're included in our state contract. And so we would also consider that too with the alternative assessment. They're included in the 3 queuing. However, when you come up with assessments, they don't always align to science of reading, so we need to make sure we're aligning that before we're putting that information out to the state. And then here you'll see the breakdown of what's recurring and non-recurring asks, and potentially in the breakdown of what each would cost us in that budget. And that's it.
Any
Questions?
questions from anyone?
Just very, very quickly, on the slide for updating literacy intervention plans to include grades 4 through 8 with a cost of $10 million, what is that $10 million for?
So currently with our K3, the districts receive the literacy intervention funds, the PRC 085. That doesn't go beyond 4 through 8. It doesn't include 4 through 8, and we're spending approximately about $10 million now for districts, so a minimum of that to expand to 4 through 8.
What are they doing with those funds?
Curriculum resources, they're using it for, you have your reading bonuses they have to give, and some of the other pieces. Anything aligned to science of reading goes in PRC 085.
Okay, and those intervention plans and the individual reading plans would be for a subgroup of students based on how they're doing academically versus all students?
Correct, that's the way it is now, yes ma'am.
Thank you.
Anyone else? And this is for the long term.
This is short session.
Short session, but it's recurring funds.
Right.
Oh, yes, recurring would be long.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. So I wanted to bring the board and superintendent some additional information. As you recall, at your last meeting, the board and the superintendent brought forward an item to consider continuing some of the support to the low-performing schools and districts that are in place, heretofore called CARES, and as Mr. Hall mentioned, looking towards a little bit of a name change as we think about the next iteration. I have been asked several times, well, what does THRIVE stand for, assuming it's an acronym, and I said, it's a word with a definition. It doesn't stand for anything other than the definition of the word, and I looked up the definition because I mean, I'm not an English teacher, but I can try to do my best. To grow vigorously and flourish. To make progress or realize a goal despite the circumstances. And so our goal to continue support beyond our ESSA 3 funding end date of September 30th. As this board well knows, we have a number of efforts underway in supporting the work across low-performing districts and schools across North Carolina, and wanting to continue those efforts and continue to make those progress and be there as a resource. As we know, most of those programs and positions are all funded in ESSA 3 dollars that will end in September. We have spent nearly $18 million to present. And so in thinking about continuing that work, I approached this work when I started on January 2nd in this role, which this is my 46th working day, because I didn't count weekends, so it's 65 days. But one of the things I felt like was a priority right away is, what do we do? What is our path forward? What's the next iteration? And that's part of why we thought about making a name change, thinking about what's the next iteration. CARES, of course, is named after a federal legislative act that sent dollars to the state. But as you know, and many of you were involved in that, that was a priority. It was an urgent matter to tend to straight away back in 2020, and it continues to be urgent. So I began asking questions of all kinds of stakeholders involved, DPI staff in the districts that were receiving this support, and anyone who I could try to get a hold of, and say, what do we keep? What do we drop? What do we modify? And trying to think critically about what would fit in those categories. It's often how I approach, continuous improvement. What do we keep? What do we drop? What do we modify? And sometimes you have to drop good things, but you don't have enough to carry all of those things forward. So we immediately began having those conversations and working through that and thinking about what are the next steps and cycles for improvement. So thinking back to where we started, this text would be very hard to read at any distance, but just kind of thinking about the roadmap of where we've come from, thinking about 2020 to those days. I wasn't in this role, but I certainly worked for the department and certainly worked in helping to start some of that and some of those initial discussions around what could we do. And I think this board asked some of those questions. In those tough days at the beginning of that very difficult time, there were a lot of questions about what can we do and what can we do right away to help where we can. And so a lot of great work has gone into that. And to echo Dr. Marr's point, a lot of great coaching has taken place in schools and districts to try to support those folks who are doing the work day to day. So thinking about how we've gone forward from 2020 over the next couple of years, as you see there, we're approaching a milestone on our journey of ESSA 3 funding ending very soon. So on the next slide, thinking through this, another factor that weighed into my decision making and thought processes were, where are all these things converging? Because we're having lots of conversations about things fitting together and planning longer term and not setting things in discrete boxes. The word silo has been batted about in this room many, many times for many, many years. And so to break those down and think across those, how do these things fit together? And so we thought about school performance grade redesign and 2 years worth of work that's gone into that and information that's moving forward on that. But we also know that we're certainly interested, and you'll hear more later about that, about a thorough rewrite of the state's ESSA plan and thinking about what does service delivery look like to schools, especially schools that are struggling, and where do we find those things? How can we work together better at this agency and partner with local school systems to do the work for those who need the support the absolute most? And then thinking about, do we then return to the long session in 2025 with a new iteration of low-performing school support that is based on better metrics, data that we can identify, and has a long-term recurring strategy instead of consistently patching together non-recurring funds or grant funds. So in those conversations and the qualitative data and many things that have been collected, some certainly predating my arrival in this role, several things emerged immediately. Some themes really started to emerge from those stakeholders who have been delivering these services, and we have a number of excellent DPI staff in these roles doing excellent work, who are critical partners, thought partners, and they believe in the work and they're out there doing it every day. So some of these things that emerged was clearly a priority on improving instruction. How do we help teachers? How do we help principals? What continuum do we put in place? So the state helps the district helps the principals help the teachers, and the teachers are there to help their students succeed. So these 4 categories really emerge from that. Professional learning, what are the professional learning things that are not statewide? They may be hyper-local. It may be just this district and their specific need, or a consortium of districts nearby that have similar needs that can group and like, and we've done some of that work. Also, systems design for sustainability. People will come and go. Some folks retire every once in a while. And so we think about those things. What will last beyond just the people in that spot? And the coaching, as we've mentioned, the critical nature of coaching at the school and the district level, and then that fed right into capacity building. Again, what's the self-efficacy, what's the agency and the empowerment of individual school and district staff to feel like, I got this, we're making progress, we are thriving instead of just surviving. So as we move forward, that's one of those we are here arrows that we encounter sometimes. And we're not quite there, but I'm there, because we have to think about what is happening in September 30th. And where do we go next, and what do we do from there? So on the next slide is a little bit of an example. Who here knows what this is? Where this is? Right, so bonus points. It's Western North Carolina, not Eastern North Carolina. That is where the Blue Ridge Parkway crosses I-26 in southern Buncombe County. And you don't get the scope of it, but that's a very high bridge, okay? And for many years, I-26 has been in the progress of widening and growth and changing, and that bridge has stood. It's not quite wide enough, it's just 2 narrow lanes. There are some concerns about life cycle and what's happening next. And the road below cannot be expanded at all. Lily knows this spot very well. The road below cannot be expanded. You can't add the 3rd lane to each side. And so thinking about moving forward, the plan, as you can see, the span is coming there next to it. This is actually an older picture. It's pretty much coming together. A new bridge is being built right alongside that will clear that span and serve far, far into the future. It'll have a bike lane and a walking path, and it will be set up to last well into the future, and it won't obstruct the road below. But it's quite a process to get to that point. But note, the car on the old bridge is still going across the bridge. The service is still being provided. Something is still there to do the job. We didn't just close the old bridge and say, well, in a few years, that new bridge will be great. No. We left the old bridge, we kept it in service, and we are constructing a new bridge along the side. So as we think moving forward, we're bringing together a tentative request, and there's been some confusion about grant. We're just seeking the flexibility to go beyond the fiscal year end date of June 30th. If we have a situation where we have one of those long sessions that turns into a very, very long session, again, we want to make sure that we have the ability to continue to access funds that can provide support in schools and districts to hopefully bridge us to that longer-term strategy of where we have permanent, recurring staffing and resources focused on supporting our lowest performing schools and districts across the state. And again, you'll see some of these categories line up with those major areas that I mentioned were emerged in all of the qualitative feedback, and we certainly are continuing to pick that apart and develop contingencies. But this is where we stand with this work. I know that this is tentative in its nature, and the board has certainly a passionate interest in this work, and certainly want to know that we appreciate our partners in the schools and the districts that have received our services, and we also appreciate our own staff who have been delivering those services. And above all, that's the most important thing. So I know my colleagues and I are happy to take any further questions on this or anything that's been discussed today.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any concerns, questions concerning what you've heard this afternoon?
I just wanted to make a
Councilman
comment, if I could, Mr. Hall.
Yes,
Thank you.
ma'am.
So thank you, Dr. Gibbs, for doing such an amazing job of explaining this, this ask that we will have of the General Assembly in the short session. For any listeners or audience members who were paying attention or present for Monday's LEA's presentation to the House Select Ed Committee on school performance grade redesign, you would have heard that one of the reasons that we need so badly to redesign the way we grade schools is so that we can better identify, triage, assess, and support the needs of our low-performing schools. And when you dig deeply into the bifurcated model of state support versus federal supports and how those designations play out, the state low performing designation on the one hand and the bottom 5% TSI, CSI on the federal side, you will see that there is very little, the 850 DNF schools that we have coincide with that federal targeted support list, but that's where the similarities end. So we have an inefficient, ineffective way of supporting our schools that is burdensome to those people leading the schools and those teachers who are trying to do school improvement. Nothing we do currently on the federal side or on the state side is adequate or, quite frankly, relevant to people working in low-performing schools. And so while we're very hopeful that the legislature will continue to allow the work that's been happening in the CARES districts to continue under Thrive, our ultimate goal is that the new school performance grade model would give the legislature, the board, and the department the data and information it needs to be able to do what is necessary for our students who are in low-performing schools. Thank you, Mr. Hall.
Thank you. Anyone else? Hearing none?
Thank you, sir.
That's our report.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. We'll now turn to the Educator Standards and Practice Committee led by Dr. Olivia Oxendine. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I am Olivia Holmes Oxendine. I chair this committee, and sharing that responsibility in that effort is Dr. Donna Tipton-Rogers. The items on my agenda for this month began with an action item, ESSA 1, and it is going to be presented by Mr. Ryan Collins. He's coming forward. And this is an item that we will vote on tomorrow. This is his final update on the temporary the approval of the temporary rules. It's located in the North Carolina Administrative Code, and it pertains to in the category of standards of professional conduct. So it's all yours, Ryan.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Good afternoon, everybody, again. I'm here to present the final proposed temporary rules for changes to the standards of professional conduct and the rules that govern educator disciplining of educator licenses. So I'm going to be walking through some of those substantive changes from what you all saw in January, just to highlight the things that we have been working on over the past couple of months. So just as a reminder, this is pursuant to Session Law 2023-128 that passed last year, in addition to making some of the changes to the criminal statutes around sexual misconduct with students. It also gave the board authority to adopt rules to update its rules related to discipline in this area. So going through some of the changes from what was presented back in January, we have done a little bit of reorganization. So Rule 601 is now exclusively a definitions section, and it takes some of the sort of introductory language that was previously in that rule and moves it into 602. It adds a definition for child to mean a person under 16 for reasons that will make sense when we get to Rule 608. It incorporates the statutory definition of professional educator, and it also expands the definition of student to include individuals in pre-K, which was some feedback we got in the public comment period to recognize the fact that there are pre-K students that are in many of our schools. 602, as I mentioned, it consolidates some of the introductory language, which was a bit duplicative from 601. It also adds a provision prohibiting intentional exposure of students to profane, vulgar, or sexually explicit materials except as part of age-appropriate classroom instruction. It clarifies that solicitation or encouragement of a romantic or sexual relationship is prohibited in any form, whether written, verbal, or physical. That was some feedback that was provided by some of the school attorneys that work in this space every day. 603, no substantive changes here. This was the investigation process. It's overseen by the superintendent. 604, this is the provision about denying or sanctioning a license. It clarifies that the revocation or suspension of an educator license or another occupational license in North Carolina or another state can be grounds for disciplinary action. The way it was written before, there was a loophole that basically if you had a medical license revoked anywhere but North Carolina, that wouldn't be a grounds, but if you, or in North Carolina, that wouldn't be grounds, but anywhere else would be, so it cleans that up. No changes in 605. Rule 606, this is voluntary surrender of a license. It removes some language that was in there about the ability of the respondent to challenge factual findings in the order accepting the voluntary surrender. Created some confusion because the idea of volunteering surrender is that they're not challenging the findings that have been, or the allegations that have been put forth. So that language has been removed. It still gives 10 days notice prior to the license actually being revoked, but it's intended to avoid confusion about their ability to challenge the findings at that point. No changes to Rule 607, which had to do with reinstatement or reconsideration. Rule 608, this is the area where there's been the most change, and a lot of this has been based on feedback from the school attorneys in the field and folks that work in HR, the people that are actually implementing these rules or actually responsible for making these reporting requirements. So the purpose of it is intended to interpret and clarify the scope of the reporting requirements under GS 115C-326.20. That's the mandatory reporting statute. So it clarifies that both convictions and charges for crimes listed in 115C-270.35B, that's the automatic revocation statute. So a conviction or a charge for any of those crimes would be reportable. Conduct involving physical or sexual abuse of a child or a student, that encompasses both what's in the statutory requirement and the state board's existing reporting rule. It also attempts to define determination of disciplinary action to include suspension with or without pay. So just in terms of the statutory process for how a teacher is investigated for misconduct, at the moment that they are suspended with or without pay, then that becomes reportable. Continuing on that same rule, it also limits reporting requirements for other types of misconduct that are not covered by that previous rule and by the mandatory reporting statute, but that could also justify disciplinary action against a license to cases in which the licensee is demoted, dismissed, or resigns. And the intent there was to clarify that I don't think there's an interest in knowing every time the teacher uses a bad word in front of their students. That doesn't need to be reported to the state board. Otherwise, I would be doing nothing else but reading reports all day. So the intent there was to clarify that it's really just the more egregious misconduct that might warrant licensure action that's reported. And it also clarifies that only one report from a PSU is needed. So even though the reporting requirements encompass several different administrators, if the HR person submits that report on misconduct, it will cover anyone that might have reporting obligations. So the principal, the superintendent, et cetera. And typically with the internal processes of school districts, everyone's talking to each other anyway. So hopefully all these people are privy to the content of that report. So these are the final versions of those temporary rules that are before the board for approval tomorrow.
Are there any questions? Questions?
I just have one question. Oh, sorry. I did have one question about slide 9, where it says conduct involving physical or sexual abuse of a child or student. That does include the educator's own children, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And that's where the definition of child came in, because it's not defined in that particular statute, but based on the statutory definitions of sexual misconduct with a child or indecently abused with a child, which is an individual under 16, that's why that term is used.
Mr. Duncan.
I had a couple questions the last time this came up. I'm gonna go to a different area this time. And I feel burdened by being a lawyer, I think, sometimes when these policies come up. But there's one in there where we took out voluntary, if you voluntarily resigned, you could not challenge or you waived your ability to challenge any factual recitations therein. It's not unheard of in legal actions that somebody, for example, takes a plea agreement and then later challenges the factual allocution, if you will, that was the subject matter of the plea agreement and is successful in doing so. That's increasingly common with the Innocence Projects and other things that have gone on. So when I saw that provision, that's what I immediately thought of. So distinguish why that'd be okay here when in other contexts you clearly can challenge later if there's a basis.
Right, so with the voluntary surrender provision, basically what is required there is that this individual saying, I'm not challenging the allegations that have been filed against me, which typically is coming from the school district that has investigated that individual. They're choosing not to challenge that, but the rule requires that there be some sort of finding of a basis for starting an investigation. So it would have and typically when we have these, it says this is what the school district alleged. This would have been a basis for investigating this person to take their license away, but they have chosen to surrender it instead. And so really all of that order is establishing is a finding of this would have justified further investigation. It's not saying any of these allegations are definitively true. It's saying this is what the district has alleged, and based on that, we would have conducted an investigation, but this person decided just to not fight it and to give up their license voluntarily. I'll note that these revocation orders are not public record. They're confidential, so all this is typically known about that individual, except to the extent that it implicates criminal activity that's otherwise public record, is the status of their license, which would, once they voluntarily surrender, it shows that it's being revoked.
Additional question?
No.
Very good. Other questions? I do have a question, Ryan. If you will go to, I don't recall which frame, maybe that's one of the early frames that has to do with vulgar, profane language. Can you go to that particular, because I want to draw, maybe I'm
Slide 6
reading
or
this
something.
incorrectly. 602, there we go. Yes, the second bullet, maybe it's Olivia's interpretation. But it implies that prohibits habitual exposure of students to profane, vulgar, or sexually explicit material except as part of age-appropriate. I'm concerned about except as part of age-appropriate classroom instruction. It gives the impression to me, and maybe I've read it too many times, it gives the it infers that vulgar, profane language is okay.
So I think
It says
to,
except as appropriate. It says to me that it's okay as part of instruction. Or if it's developmentally, if the material is presented to students at the, let's say at the right developmentally appropriate level. Am I confusing something?
I think Ms. Jones has a comment.
I would speak to that. So as a humanities teacher, there are times when my students are reading memoirs. As a Holocaust educator, there's times where my kids are reading letters where in the face of war, in the face of genocide, people express themselves using profanity.
Yeah.
And it is developmentally appropriate and it's directly tied to the curriculum. And so in those instances, they're going to hear profanity that is directly related to instruction because it's a primary source document. And in that case,
I do understand that.
it is appropriate.
I've taught materials such as, I'm probably thinking about it too hard. Because the word vulgar, sexually explicit, then I'm thinking about pictures. I don't know. It's just a thought.
And I think other things that might be encompassed with that is basic anatomy in courses. There might be some material that's in a textbook that might be encompassed with that. It's important to remember these are always, fact-specific inquiries, and so if it's shown that this was part of pedagogically sound instruction, then there wouldn't be a basis for it.
Would have to be clearly justified by the principal, the educator.
Right. What this ultimately is trying to do is, I think, address some of the situations involving teachers that are involved in sexual exploitation charges, child pornography, things like that, which of course has criminal implications as well. But
Yes, that's more germane to the criminal implications. Thank you very much. Other questions? None? Then we'll move along to the next item.
thank you, everyone.
And the next item, and this is coming tomorrow for a final vote by this board. The next item is a discussion item. Dr. Seiberg is going to be the staffer who presents this. This is the annual report to the North Carolina General Assembly, and it's the EPP report card. As you know, there's a comprehensive dashboard that goes along with this that we can open and review and look at all the data that our EPPs provide on an annual basis. Dr. Seiberg, you're ready.
Good afternoon, board members. Thank you for giving me a couple minutes here. The annual educator preparation program reporting is a requirement in law. On slide 3 here, we have the 2 references to the law about the state board shall recognize or shall require all recognized EPPs to submit annual performance reports. And then you see in that second bullet there, they go further to say, can we make that available to the public through the DPI website on an annual basis beginning December 15th of 2019, and shall submit annually as well to the JLEOC. Just a quick note here, the law requires these reports to be submitted in December. Annually, we always file for an extension because we're not able to access EVOS data in time to submit that. So just to make sure everybody has clarity on that. On the next slide here then is the link. On this page, it'll bring you to the annual reporting for EPPs. This link is also now accessible on the DPI website under the Educator Preparation section. So all the data are now nested where they should be and publicly facing. On the next slide, this slide sort of lays out that our state collects a huge amount of data on educator preparation programs. And I just thought I'd take a second and walk through the general topics. These are topics that are required in law. And just to make sure that you have a clear understanding of what you have access to. Under enrollment, that has to do with the counts of candidates enrolled in North Carolina educator preparation programs from 3 different perspectives. The first is those candidates that are in the program in their first year, the first year of the program. The second is those completing their program in the year that you're looking at. And the third is the total of everyone enrolled. So it could be a brand new teacher, it could be somebody that's been in the program for a couple of years, but everybody is included as the third lens. Under prior academic preparation, this displays the grade point averages and the entrance exam scores. So this has to do with like SAT scores, ACT scores, Praxis Core, all those entrance requirements of candidates that they need to have in place in order to begin an educator preparation program and pursue an initial teaching license. Candidate satisfaction, this section reports on the annual recent graduate survey. So we ask folks who just completed their educator preparation program and who are employed in their first year of teaching to respond to a survey. It's on a variety of questions about their level of preparation on a myriad of teaching tasks. So that's captured in that particular dashboard. Under initial licensure rate, the dashboard shows 2 measures related to candidate progress towards licensure. So the first is the number of candidates on the traditional route to licensure who complete the educator preparation program and receive initial teaching licenses. And then the second is the proportion of all candidates with initial teaching licenses who convert the licenses to continuing professional licenses, otherwise known as CPLs. Licensure exam pass rates, that's straight ahead. That's just the candidate pass rates on exams that are required for receiving the license. Under North Carolina Employment and Retention, this dashboard tracks candidates who have completed their ed prep program to see how many are employed as teachers in North Carolina public schools, and that includes charters within 1, 2, or 3 years of program completion. Teaching performance then is candidate ratings on the North Carolina Educator Evaluation System, or NESIS, in their first year of teaching. So they are evaluated by their administrator, and this is providing the candidate ratings by the educator preparation program. Student growth, we don't have measures on every subject, but where we have EVOS data, student growth is provided for candidates who are in those subjects and came out of North Carolina Public Schools. The employer satisfaction, so we have this recent graduate survey which captures the perception of folks who just completed a program. But then the other side of that, if you think about a 360 evaluation, you're also curious, I would imagine, about the perception of the principals who are hiring those recent graduates. So that's what we call the employer satisfaction survey, and they're asked a battery of similar questions to see how this beginning teacher that they supervise was prepared, the quality of their preparation on a number of teaching tasks, relative to other beginning teachers that they've had experience supervising in the past. There are also materials available about Ed Prep program offerings, their direct and ongoing involvement with and service to public schools, and faculty counts. So together, these dashboards require or provide data that are required in law, and they're designed so that the user, you all and anybody that's out in the public can examine their data interactively and with the intent to make them user-friendly and intuitive. And to that end, on each dashboard, there's an information link where you can review detailed descriptions of what it is you're actually looking at, also where the data sources are coming from, and the version history. You can also, on each dashboard, you can look at the measures over time. You can disaggregate information by race, gender, and ethnicity. You can examine by educator preparation program type, so you could look at public institutions versus private institutions versus non-traditional programs. You can also examine by program level, so if I wanted to look at licensure-only candidates versus undergraduate versus graduate, I can disaggregate by that criteria. And there's even a do-it-yourself function, so if the visuals that we're providing do not give you the level of granularity that you'd like to see, there on each of those dashboards, you can select the very specific data that you want to look at, and then you can pull that specific data down to take a unique context that maybe we didn't address, but you have access to the data so that you can look at it. So a variety of things that are at your fingertips then within all these dashboards. So on the next slide here, that's just the landing page. If you could go back one, Ruben, thanks. Yeah, so once you click on that link, it'll take you to this dashboard, and this dashboard will help you get from, think of it as like a landing page, and then from there, whatever you're interested in, you can click on it, it'll take you into the various dashboards from that point forward. So in addition to meeting the reporting obligations, I also wanted to briefly share some insight on overall enrollment and just a few overall findings that we reviewed in the 2022 and 2023 data. On slide 8, when we look at the overall enrollment in educator preparation programs, we're reporting a total of 15,865 candidates pursuing initial teaching licenses in 2022 and 2023. And this represents a decline of about 10% from the previous year. And in looking at this over time, since we now have a decade worth of data, it represents an increase of 43% from 10 years ago. On the next slide, when we look specifically at new enrollments, so in that previous slide we looked at all enrollments, whether they were brand new or had been in that process for 2 or 3 or more years. Now we're looking at only those folks that are in newly enrolled into those Ed Prep programs. We see an incoming 5,020 candidates entered the Ed Prep pipeline in 22 and 23. And that represents a decline of about 11% from the previous year. So on this slide, you can see that the height of new enrollments in North Carolina occurred in 2020 and 2021, which also coincided with a change in law. It was a temporary change in law for 1 year during the middle of the pandemic that waived the entrance exam requirements for enrolling in an Ed Prep program. So that's not to say that other factors couldn't be contributing to this increase that you see. But it certainly is something that's worth noting that there was this waiver that occurred during that 1 year only. On the next slide, I just wanted to share just a couple brief outcomes just to show you some general trends at the state aggregate level. When you're looking at the first one, which is the candidate satisfaction survey, again, that's the recent graduates taking a variety of questions about their preparation. We do want to acknowledge that about 3 years ago, we added some questions around literacy, and that had to do with the initiatives that the department was taking towards expanding literacy and its importance out in the field. And when we did that, we do see a slight decline over the past couple of years, and that's indicating that folks are saying they're not as well prepared in that area of licensure as other components of preparation, and that is a way of thinking about that slight decline. On the employer satisfaction, that's the principal survey. Teaching performance is measured by NESIS, and student growth measured by EVOS. All of those measures that you see on that slide remain fairly stable, so no dramatic increases or decreases over time. And then lastly, I just wanted to thank everyone that worked on educator preparation reporting over the past year. This takes almost a year for us to put together. It requires a huge amount of work from all the ed prep programs and a variety of stakeholders out in the field. And many thanks to Andy Baxter and Pat Doherty and Kim Evans within our own team. This is a really high level of detail to put all these things together, make sure everything is as accurate as possible. We've also reviewed this with the ed prep programs back in December. Over the past few weeks, we've had individual meetings with them as needed, and we've also talked with this in our monthly EPP meetings. So I just wanted to make sure that we thanked everybody that were involved in the process.
Very, very good. Any questions or comments? One of the things I do want to echo, the fact that you are conducting the monthly meetings with the EPPs, and I think those meetings occur maybe right after state board.
That's correct.
So you'll be meeting with the
Friday.
EPPs on Friday.
Mhm.
That is such good progress forward because it answers so many questions and clarifies so much of information that can be misunderstood in field. So I'm very, very, very happy with that. It's ongoing, and you're right, there's a lot of work that goes in these annual big reports that the General Assembly expects. So just huge kudos to all you do.
Thank you.
And no questions or comments? Okay, very good. So this is a discussion item, and it will be coming back to us next month for a vote. And so the next three items are updates. The first one is a teacher leadership council, and the update is going to be presented by Ms. Julie Pittman. She's coming forward. The next one is going to be promising practices, grow your own, and the two presenters are Matthew Bristow Smith. It's good seeing him again, principal from Edgecombe County, and joining him in that presentation will be Stephanie Wallace, who is a teacher from Winston-Salem Forsyth, and she is a classroom teacher. The final update will be promising practices, affordable housing, and the presenter will be Dr. Otis Smallwood, superintendent from Bertie County. And then joining that presentation will be Dr. Angie Mullinex, Director of Innovative Practices and Program State Military Liaison. So you have the floor, Julie.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Oxendine, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, board members, advisors, and my colleagues. I am here today along with my colleague, Dr. Angie Mullinex, and am very excited to be back working with her on some promising practices and bringing some incredible things that are happening across our state in light to the board today. When I was asked to take this role back in January of 2021, Superintendent Truitt tasked me with creating a teacher leadership council. And over the last 3 years, we've grown that council to over 100 members that consists of both district and charter teachers of the year, beginning teachers of the year, and other recognized teacher leaders from all across our state, from Murphy to Manteo, who serve on a rotating basis. These teachers give feedback and input on such things as school performance grade redesign, teacher working condition surveys, the digital learning plans, and many other things, as well as work on problems of practice. Last spring, we worked with Dr. Heather Mullins, our Southwest Regional Director, Dr. Ashley McBride, who's from our Digital Learning Initiative, and several others to identify problems of practice in the state of our teaching profession. And we did that thanks in part to our partnership and grant with Equitable Foundation, who supports teacher leaders across the nation and has taken a keen focus on what we're doing with teacher leaders here in North Carolina, and what Superintendent Truitt is for building teacher leadership across the state. So the problem of practice that popped up, as probably of no surprise to any of you listening, were teacher recruitment and retention issues, as well as beginning teacher support. So we have spent the last several months researching, speaking to experts at DPI and field experts, analyzing policy, and trying to understand really what is, and you can go to the next slide, that's fine, what really is at the base of teacher recruitment and teacher retention issues, and what are equitable practices around beginning teacher support across the state. And we're meeting actually again today at 4 o'clock. So we meet regularly every month on typically the Wednesday of the board meeting from 4 until 5 or 5:30 virtually. And we've grown that every month, and that has been diligently over the last 3 years. We don't meet during the summer, and we usually take October off because we're at the AIM conference. So we're oftentimes face-to-face there. So one of the things that has popped up that we are going to be working on that's come out of these problem of practice groups is a grow your own convening that will happen at the AIM conference in October on the second day of the conference on October the 8th at the Raleigh Convention Center. So our hope during that time is to bring folks from our EPPs, our community colleges, and our districts together who are interested in ways that we can support grow your own initiatives across the state, as well as people who are already doing the work so that they can network with others and find ways that they can scale those work practices in their own districts. We're looking at teaching as a profession, which is the CTE course, as well as teacher cadet, and you're going to hear about that from my colleague Stephanie Wallace, who is a longstanding member of our Teacher Leadership Council here, and ways that we can build a 2+2+2 program, and ways that our high school students can get college credit for the work that they're doing when they're becoming interested in being a teacher. We're looking at public and private partnerships, beginning teacher support, and our new teacher support programs that our EPPs also support. We're looking at local programs, like you're going to hear from Matt Bristow-Smith, who is no stranger to our board table, and what he's doing at the early college in Edgecombe County, as well as the many housing initiatives and the many different public-private partnerships that have to happen in order to make those happen. So that is going to happen in October, and we're working very hard over the next several months to make sure that we bring all the members of our state together at that convening at the Raleigh Convention Center, so that we can really build up what we're doing as a state to fortify our pipeline and really assist our districts in helping them overcome the obstacles to recruiting quality teachers, retaining folks who want to stay in the classroom, and then making sure that they're being able to stay in our own districts and the districts that they're serving. So I'm really excited to be here today with Dr. Mullinex and bring these folks here who can begin the conversation that we're going to have over the next 3 months and discuss the work that our teachers on the Teacher Leadership Council are leading us in, and then dipping into the work that our folks in the field are doing on a day-to-day basis. So it is my pleasure to bring our first presenter to you today. It is our great friend and colleague, Matthew Bristow-Smith, who is the principal of Edgecombe Early College. high school in Edgecombe County Public Schools, and he is going to talk to you about a great program that many of you already are familiar with, Scholar Teachers, growing Edgecomb's next generation of teachers.
Well, hello, friends.
Hi.
It's nice to see you all. You know, my mom was a teacher for 32 years. I was a classroom teacher for 16 years before I crossed over to the dark side and became a principal. And my daughter's going into teaching, so I truly appreciate the leadership that you all provide, especially during these tough times, so thank you for that. I couldn't be more excited to talk with you guys today about our Scholar Teachers program here in Edgecombe County. And for those of you over 40, I'm going to begin with a metaphor, so Rupen, if you will. Some of you all may remember a sports fantasy film in which Kevin Costner was a Midwestern farmer out in a cornfield in which he began to hear voices, and the voices were saying to him, you know it, if you build it, they will come, right? And so for those of you over 40, I'm right there with you, and for those of you under 40, it's okay, you'll catch up with us. But if you build it, they will come was essentially the leap of faith that we made in Edgecombe County in 2018 when we were in our own cornfield and we were dealing with, you know, some of the same things that many of our folks across the state deal with, particularly when you're looking at our economic distress rating maps. And so here we have, you know, the map of North Carolina. You see that large band of Tier 1 high poverty counties in rural North Carolina. We have really unique challenges when it comes to recruiting teachers, challenges that are different than those that are faced in urban areas or even suburban areas. You know, we have not benefited in Edgecombe County from the North Carolina Teaching Fellows Program, which is the premier scholarship program in our state, through no fault of that program, but simply because the way it's designed and the forces that be, it tends to be a magnet that draws talent from rural North Carolina schools rather than returning talent to those schools. And so recognizing that fact and certainly appreciating that program and all the others that help to catalyze, grow our own programs across the state, we decided in 2018 to really try something different. And so what I want to share with you today is a little bit about our journey. So understanding the data from where we were in 2018, we were looking at a 20% teacher turnover rate every single year in Edgecombe County. And you know, some of that is an aging teacher force and folks that naturally, like my mom, had reached year 31, year 32, and had decided to retire, rightfully so, and had earned their retirement. Some of that is natural attrition. Some of that was just the challenges of trying to recruit folks to a school system that is not in an urban area and doesn't have some of those amenities and certainly doesn't have the local supplement for pay and some of those other things. But I want you to imagine if you're a student who's growing up in a school system from kindergarten to 12th grade. And some of you who grew up in schools may remember that there was a time in which when you were in first grade, you knew who the second grade teachers were and you knew who the third grade teachers were. And there was a stability to the schools that you attended because, you know, folks taught there and they put down deep roots and they stayed. But imagine you're growing up in a school system where you're not really sure if the person that you're talking to today will be there next year. If the club that you're running that is being sponsored this year is going to be there next year. If the principal is going to be the same principal next year. And understanding this, imagine you're a child where every single year, 20% of the faces that you know from one year are not there the next. That's incredible. That level of turnover is tough for systems to sustain. It's also tough for children to navigate. And so this was the data in Edgecombe and so many other rural North Carolina counties that prompted us to try something that we hadn't done before, and that is look internally and find the talent within our own district to try to capitalize upon the fact that there's one undeniable thing that is a lever that impacts student learning, and that is having great teachers. You guys know the research and the data on that. Great teachers are the single most important school-based factor in whether or not students learn. Period. Drop the mic on that. More important than principals, more important than curriculum, more important than funding, more important than facilities, more important than this, that, and the other. The most important lever, whether you're talking about equity or talking about other things, the most important lever for whether or not kids learn is the classroom teacher, a high-quality classroom teacher. And we knew that we had talent in Edgecombe. We hadn't really looked internally to try to develop that talent. But starting with that core belief and that core factual piece that great teachers make all the difference, we began a program called the Scholar Teachers Program. And so I'm about to make you really happy. If you take a quick look at these faces, these are all students who, over the past 5 to 6 years, have come through Edgecombe Early College High School, Edgecombe County Public Schools, and are on track to become teachers. They all have gone through our Scholar Teachers program. They are all in college. They are all, and I'm going to talk about this in just a minute, on a scholarship loan structured very similar to the North Carolina Teaching Fellows program to bring them back to Edgecombe. And so I thought putting some shining faces in front of you would maybe brighten your day just a little bit. I will say that I have photo permission forms to use all of these pictures in today's presentation pursuant to recent legislation about that. But these are all folks that I want you to know I don't think would be on a path to become teachers if we hadn't created that path. You know, if we were not in the cornfield and if we didn't say, let's build it, they will come, I don't believe that these students would be on the path to become teachers. So let me tell you just a little bit about our Scholar Teachers program, and I know we have a few data points I'm going to animate here for you. And Rupen, I'll keep up with you if you'll just start popping these up. So first, our program is anchored at our local early college. And so Lily, I understand you're an early college student from Haywood. I'm happy to be standing here at the table with you, proud of you. If you need a job teaching, we'll recruit you to the East. But your principal and mine are great friends. Edgecombe Early College High School is a place in which there's a joyful spirit there. One of the reasons that we're able to recruit teachers, students to become teachers is because they like being students at our school. Also, our students are on track to get their 2-year associate's degree while they're at our school. And so we know that every one of these students are already college going because it's baked into the program that we already have in place. Our students take 4 teacher cadet classes. Teacher Cadet 1, 2, 3, and 4. Actually, this year we have a Teacher 5 and a Teacher 6, Teacher Cadet 5 and 6. And so this is not a program to supplant the colleges of education. It's an exposure program. It links theory and it links practice and also links field experiences the students have. All of our kids, as they matriculate through the program, starting from the first month they're in the program, they do internships working in local elementary and middle schools because the younger generation, y'all, they don't want to pay their dues and then get the joy of working with kids. They want to work with kids immediately. And so by the time they graduate from us, our kids have 200 hours of actual field experience working in Edgecombe County schools under the leadership of teachers. And I think that's pretty powerful. If after 4 teacher cadet classes and 200 hours of field experience, you still go into the profession, guess what? You're going in with your eyes wide open, right? And so key values that drive our program. 1, equity, okay? Teachers are an equity move. They are an equity lever. Every single child in Edgecombe County deserves to have a high quality teacher, just like every single child in every Tier 3 county across our state, okay? Absolutely. Power of place. Sorry, everybody, but we're not building this program for the other 99 LEAs in North Carolina. We're building this for Edgecombe. It is by us. It is for us. And then third, our other key value is children. I know that we may not think of children as a value. I certainly do. Children are a value. And so we're trying to build this not just around our own talent pool. We're trying to build this around the fact that the kids who will have these teachers in their classrooms, that's our outcome. That's our focus. And so we are developing the knowledge, we are developing the skills, and we are developing the dispositions for our folks to enter colleges of education, the schools of their choice, with their eyes wide open. Hopefully they are the most prepared pre-service teachers that these colleges of education will ever see. So with that, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the scholarship loan, because I think that's something that's very unique about us, okay? So we developed a promissory scholarship called the Scholar Teachers Promise Scholarship. Now, it is structured very similarly to the North Carolina Teaching Fellows, which, as you know, has a geographic scope of North Carolina. I was a North Carolina Teaching Fellow. I grew up in Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools for K-12. I have not returned to teach there because the promissory agreement was for the entire state, and Winston-Salem Forsyth County did not get any return on investment from me. However, our program has a specific geographic focus back to Edgecombe County. So let me tell you a little bit about the Scholar Teacher Scholarship. First, there are no restrictions upon which college our students can attend and what subject they can teach. So the folks that I showed you earlier, they are at North Carolina Wesleyan. They went to UNCG. They're at East Carolina University. Those folks have gone to Barton. We have a whole bunch of them at NC State and other colleges across the state. It is tough enough to tell kids, hey, you need to enter the most important profession, but also the most challenging, while also saying to them, we're going to pick which schools you go to. Okay, we're going to pick which subjects you teach. And guess what? In Edgecombe County, we need more than STEM and EC. We need every single subject, right? So we don't tell them what they have to teach, and we don't tell them what college they need to attend, because we think we've got great colleges of education all across our state. So that scholarship is $10,000 a year for 3 years. Now recognize that all the folks graduating from our program have their 2-year associate's degree already. So when they leave us, that 2 + 2 + 2 that Julie was referring to, they go into a college of education at a university, that's typically for them a 3-year program, 2 years of coursework plus that last year where they're going to do their clinicals, their internships. So we fund them $10,000 a year for 3 years, which is not a full scholarship, but it is substantial enough for them that it makes college possible. Add to that a Pell Grant, add for that the transformational scholars, add for that other scholarship money, and almost every one of our scholars is going to graduate debt-free. And I think that's really important to note. It is repayable through service in Edgecombe County, just like the Teaching Fellows that has a promissory agreement. Our promissory agreement is specific to Edgecombe. We modeled it after the Teaching Fellows Commission's actual document. So sharing with you that it's a promissory loan scholarship. And then also just sharing with you that up to this point, we have not used any public dollars to fund that scholarship. And I want to talk just a little bit about that. Now, we are about to partner with the Teaching Fellows, and Dr. Bennett Jones has some really exciting initiatives that he's been rolling out to 20 LEAs across the state. That's not my presentation. But up to this point, we've not engaged in any public dollars. But what we do have is we have partners. Because if you're going to build it, and if you want them to come, you can't do it by yourself. And so building that $30,000 scholarship for all of those kids has required us to have folks that believe what we believe, that believe that children are an asset, that they're a value, that teachers make all the difference. And so in 2018, we went to Barnhill Contracting in Rocky Mount. We went to Barnhill. We sat down with Bob and Penny Barnhill, and we laid out this plan, something that we wanted to achieve. It was a logic model. Don't know if Jenny Corn is still here, but she was my logic model teacher in my grad school program. We laid out a logic model for them about what we wanted to achieve. And they asked, is anyone else doing this in our area? And the answer was no. We had NELA that was doing it for principals. We had the Teaching Fellows that was doing it statewide, but nobody was doing it restricted to their county. And so they said, how do you know it will work? And we said, we don't. But you know what? If you build it, they will come. And so this is important because when corporate partners want to invest, sometimes we have to approach them as if they're venture capitalists, as if what we're proposing to them is something that we may not have proof of concept with, but that nonetheless, if we can get them on board with the vision, if they understand what our outcomes are, they will often step right in line with us and help to fund these dreams that we have. And so Barnhill Family Foundation, we have teachers, 3 teachers in Edgecombe County in our second cohort. They're in their second year teaching, all 3 of which were funded by the Barnhill Family Foundation and Bob and Penny Barnhill. And so I share that. On top of that, the Anonymous Trust stepped in and they created some challenge grant funding for us, said if you will raise some money, we will match some funds for you. Corning has been an incredible partner, has funded 10 scholarships for us over the next 10 years. Now, take 10 and multiply that times 30, and you understand the scope of investment of this corporate partner. And they have not asked for anything in return. I need to make sure I say this. The only thing they've asked in return is that we support these teachers and we get them into classrooms so that their employees can have children that attend our schools who actually have teachers. And I think that's powerful. Our Board of Education has invested. We've had a lot of other local individuals that have said, I believe what you believe and I want to put my money behind it. And now we're at a point where we're starting to think about sustainability long term, which is where I think that Teaching Fellows Commission venture is going to be very possible. But also, we're building an endowment. And so I want to say that again. We're building an endowment. An endowment will make this sustainable forever. And we have our first donor, the Clark Family Foundation has donated $370,000 to seed our endowment. And I share these numbers with you only because I want you to understand the scope of investment that's necessary for a Tier 1, high poverty, rural North Carolina, when you're standing in a cornfield and you hear the voices and the voices say, if you build it, they will come, what it takes to build it, okay? And so with that, I just want to make sure that I pause and I say, we are not experts in this space. We are in year 6. We are still growing this, but we are excited about where we're headed. We started 6 years ago without a single child in our program, with no dollars in our investment accounts and with no scholarships. All we had is a vision. And now here we are 6 years later. We have 25 students that are either in the classroom, in college. We've got more coming up behind us, and we're learning as we go. We've got partners that are helping us with us, and those voices that we were hearing in the cornfield don't sound so crazy anymore. Yeah. And so with that, I will say if you can do it in Edgecombe, I think you can do it almost anywhere. Yeah. And it is my honor to transition and to introduce you to someone who I look up to. and that is Stephanie Wallace. Stephanie is a teacher at East Forsyth High School, which is where I graduated from. So she is a Fighting Eagle. And I've been following her teacher cadet program for many, many years. And the scope of impact that Stephanie's program has achieved is incredible. So we are trying to catch up with Ms. Stephanie Wallace. And so Stephanie, I will step aside and pass it to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Good afternoon.
It's exciting. The first time I met Matt, he was like, I was an Eagle. And so that's pretty cool. And he says he's trying to catch up with me, but I keep telling my superintendent, we need to be looking at what they're doing. Why can't we do scholarships? Where are we? And so I think it's going to be a tag team effort. I started teaching as a North Carolina Teaching Fellow in Forsyth County 24 years ago. And my very first year, my principal said to me, we have a teacher cadet program. The teacher's retiring in December. I want you to go get trained and take over the program. I had absolutely no idea what 21-year-old me was getting into. But to say that it is a work of the heart and it is a passion of mine is an understatement. The first couple of slides that you have are some of the program logistics. It talks about the curriculum, what the students are exposed to as far as their field experience, the psychology of education, educational law and policy, all of those things. And then it gives you a little bit of information about how we differ from the CTE course that is available, because we are not a completer track. We do not have a test attached to us, any of those things. More importantly to me is what comes on the slides after that. My new superintendent, Mrs. McManus, and I were able to have a conversation in 2020 when I was selected as the District Teacher of the Year. And in that conversation, I talked to her about my teacher cadet program. And she immediately got on board. She said, why are we not doing this in all of our high schools? Why are we not pushing this? At that time, I had a little over 280 students who had come through my program. Over 180 of them are teaching in North Carolina right now, and 70 plus of them are in my county. 11 of them are on my staff. My former cadets are teaching my own biological children. And so Ms. McManus tasked her leadership team with figuring out a way to fund this, because what you may or may not know is we are not a state allotted course. Our principals give up an allotment in whatever subject area their teacher cadet teacher is in, and we lost all of our legislative funding in 2011. We had funding, the program had funding through the General Assembly, and we lost that funding. And so Teacher Cadet has come under the auspices of the North Carolina Foundation for Public School Children, who has helped us to stay alive. Ms. McManus's team wrote an E-slip grant, and with that, she put Teacher Cadet in every high school in our district over a 2-year period. She is holding our principals completely harmless for the allotment. My principal has his full English allotment and gives me the space for Teacher Cadet. I have a math 3 teacher teaching it. I have a U.S. history teacher teaching it in the counties or in the schools across my district. We went from 81 students enrolled to 148 students enrolled just with that change. When we polled our principals, they said the #1 reason they did not have the program was that allotment piece. They could not afford, especially in tested subjects, to give up those experts in the classroom. And so Ms. McManus said, well, I'll fix that first. The 2 quotes that you see here are from Mrs. McManus, my superintendent, and the picture that you see is from our first Winston-Salem Forsyth County Aspiring Educators Day that was held in February of this year. Our central office brought all of the cadets and our CTE students into the same space to hear from colleges and universities, to hear from students who are currently in educational prep programs, and to hear from veteran teachers from the district. And that is Leanna Daly and Joel Leith, both of whom are former teacher cadets from my classroom that are now teaching in Winston-Salem Forsyth County and are also hosting my current cadets in their classrooms. From a parent perspective, teaching a program that doesn't have a lot of funding, I do a lot of fundraising. And it's really difficult to fundraise if the parents don't see the value in the program. This young lady is Sawyer Weems. Her mother is a financial secretary at one of our local elementary schools. Her father is a police officer in our community. Sawyer joined Teacher Cadet as a freshman. She was actually the first freshman that I ever had. Mostly I had juniors and seniors so that they could drive to complete their field experience. But Sawyer's parents committed to getting her to field experience if I would allow her to start as a freshman. She's the reason why I now have TC 3 and 4. Because her parents advocated with my school board, we want our daughter in this program all 4 years. She is dedicated to becoming a classroom teacher. The comments that you have here are from Sawyer's mom. She has told me multiple times that the coursework that Sawyer is doing in my classroom specifically is some of the best things that she's done in high school, hands down, including exploring colleges, learning how to write resumes, learning how to write professional emails, learning what it means to be an advocate for something that you believe in, and how to do that through the appropriate channels and with the appropriate language and means and decorum. She has also been allowed to work in other leadership roles on our campus, and as of this past weekend, was elected the state president for the North Carolina Teacher Cadet Program, and will begin serving in that role next year as a senior and as a TC4. The next slide is from a parent in my district who is also an educator. It is from Mr. Sigler. He is the only elementary band teacher in Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, and his child Robin is in my teacher cadet class. This is Sawyer actually tutoring Robin in pre-cal after school in my classroom. And Mr. Sigler has hosted some of my students. That's one of the beauties of teacher cadet. There are so many, but that field experience component that Matt spoke about, their opportunity for them to get out into the classrooms and to work with kids. I've had students come in, they're like, oh, I'm gonna teach elementary school. And then they come back and they're like, oh my God, you were right, they leak. And they come in and they're like, I'm gonna teach middle school. And they come back and they're like, no, they don't even know what those words mean that they're using, and they're hormones with tennis shoes. And so they get a chance to explore all the levels and to find where they wanna be. My current TC4 came to me the other day. She was like, Wallace, you gotta stop doing this. I was like, doing what? She was like, you gave me what I wanted, and now I'm rethinking my choices. She has enrolled in college for secondary education and is currently working in an exceptional children's classroom and has fallen madly in love with EC. And so you can't duplicate that outside of actually being in a classroom. As a teaching fellow, I was required, I went into UNCG, secondary ed. I had to do 25 hours in elementary and 25 hours in middle school for just this purpose, to make sure I was where I wanted to be. And I ran screaming from elementary and middle and stayed in secondary where I wanted to be. It's just for them to get out there and to be with kids. We've served with EdCore as reading tutors. They've got, my teacher cadets took training in phonics and worked with third grade students. They're working in EC, they're working in multi-language classrooms, and that experience is what's gonna get them into our classrooms and keep them coming back to our classrooms. The last slide that you have is from one of those that stayed, Amanda Frederico. She is with me looking at the screen, she's on my left. These are all former cadets at an event that we had earlier this year. We had a teacher cadet block party and invited everyone teaching in our district who graduated from a cadet program to come and hook back up with their cadet teachers and to network. And you can see here what Amanda says about the program, and she's still teaching at my high school. She is dual certified in English and Spanish, and she is currently teaching our Sheltered English 2 classes with our language learners that still have to be able to access that English 2 in a course test in June. And she said that the curriculum that we did in Teacher Cadet was rivaled the things that she did in college. She firmly believes that her experiences in Teacher Cadet are what got her to go into education and to stick with it. Our cadets are doing wonderful things across this state. I have one cadet teaching in Chicago. I'm trying to get her to come back. But our cadets, when we had the teaching fellows, there were years I would have 8 or more of my cadets get the teaching fellow scholarship. We are told repeatedly how better prepared they are going into college programs and to going into classrooms. My cadets are constantly being requested to come in. I even have one, Adam Moore, the teacher that he worked with as a freshman cadet. His wife went out on maternity leave, and he took a week off to stay home with his wife and requested that Adam be allowed to come deliver the content in his high school U.S. history class. The sub obviously had to be there. Adam did all the teaching for that week. They are prepared, they're professional, they're passionate, and we need that in our state. Teachers are leaving in droves for reasons, a myriad of reasons. We've got to have programs like the Teacher Cadet program that show them all the reasons why this profession is so amazing and why they want to stay right here in North Carolina and keep making it even more amazing as they continue to change lives. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Matt and Stephanie, for providing us some insight on 2 of the options to help grow that teacher pipeline. So thinking about that, we want to grow our pipeline, but we also, once we have our educators, we want to retain that pipeline, right? That is equally as important. You can go on to the next slide. So one way that, that some districts across North Carolina and now the country are looking at doing that is through affordable housing. There are some bullets there on the slide for you, but just to summarize, affordable housing is housing that does not cost as much as the market rate would, so that it is within reason of the salary that that individual is making. And typically it's related to our service industry. So educators, police, fire are the ones that are really being thought of for these affordable housing opportunities. It can be in partnership with local education agencies, universities, philanthropic organizations. There are a variety of ways that you're going to hear about today of which that affordable housing can be stood up. So just real quick, I want to highlight a few that we've spotlighted across North Carolina. And then at the end, I will turn it over to Dr. Otis Smallwood, the superintendent of Bertie County Schools, who's going to go into detail about how he is doing that in his school district. So just real quick to touch on these, one program is the Duke Teach House, and that's a partnership with Durham Public Schools. There are 2 homes, as you see at the top picture. The other one is right next to it, looks very similar. I think it's a greenish shade of a home. They're 2-story homes. They're beautiful inside. They were gifted to the College of Education for teacher housing. So beginning teachers years 1, 2, and 3 can apply to live in these housing complexes. And the College of Education helps to foster professional development. The teachers get a stipend. And these teachers were really impressive when I went out there to talk with them and to learn what they were doing. Very impressive teachers, and they were getting that mentorship from the College of Education. Another one is Dare County Schools expanded teacher housing. Dare County was one of the first districts to have teacher housing. They have 2 complete teacher housing apartment complexes in Dare County, and they're looking for a 3rd property to build a 3rd because they have a wait list that is at least 20, 30 educators long. As you know, Dare County is very expensive, and really the only rentals that are available are short-term rentals, and educators just can't afford to live in those. So that's another one. Buncombe County Schools and Asheville City Schools is unique because it's a partnership between 2 school districts in 1 county. Asheville City is a smaller school district, so within that apartment complex, they have 6 units, and Buncombe County has the remaining 20-ish units. So it's also nice that 2 districts have a partnership like that, where educators can interact with one another. Hertford County Schools is our original housing project. When they worked with the State Employees Credit Union to develop their application for the housing, and they worked through some other pieces. One of the requirements that State Employees Credit Union put on them is to map this out so that anybody going after them would know what was done for Hertford County, and they could follow something similar. And then finally, as I mentioned, we have Bertie County Schools, and we're very fortunate that Dr. Otis Smallwood, the superintendent, is going to explain to us how they are doing that in their district.
I didn't know if I could be able to see or not. Good afternoon, Superintendent Troy, Chair Davis, board members. Thank you for allowing me this space to talk about the district that I love, which is Bertie County Schools. Right? Well, this is one of the ways we try to help fix it. So if you look at the recruiting highly effective teachers, 2 things I talked about with my commissioners and my board when I arrived is that we didn't have a local supplement in Bertie. We were one of only 3 counties that did not have a supplement. When I presented that day to commissioners, it kind of shamed them, so they gave me money. All right, so they gave me half of what I asked for, but I had to go on fund balance, which was fine, to offer our teachers a 3% local supplement. Now we've been able to get up to 5. The next challenge was we knew teachers needed a place to stay. We knew our attrition rate was high, well above state averages. Our recoup rate was very low and has been that way for several years. But we know a bigger challenge in rural northeastern North Carolina is housing. It's not anywhere to stay. So this project had really been talked about prior to my administration, and it failed. It didn't go through for whatever reason, but we were able to revive it. So glad about that. But that is a picture of the 2-bedroom apartment complex. That's just one picture. I mean, there is a buzz in the county because it's never been anything built in our county like this. So it's right on a main highway, so people are driving by asking questions, but that's just one of the 3 units, and it will be ready to occupy July 1st of this year. But it's a 24 2-bedroom apartment complex that's owned by the Public Schools Foundation, and it's on 6 acres of land that was donated, and we're only using 3 acres, so we have a potential for expansion. So just a little bit about involvement in the history. Mr. Ron Weston, who's a county commissioner, also the president of our foundation, could not be here today. So that's why you see his picture, because you might hear me talk about him, so you know who I'm talking about. But of course, he returned to the county several years ago after having worked away for several years. I returned, and we both have a vested interest in our city. So, town, I apologize, there's nothing about it that's a city. But I attended schools, of course, in Bertie County, graduated from Bertie High in 1989. Like I said, we were just very, very, very vested in trying to do things better, to try to make some better situations for our kids. So, like I said, this project had been discussed before and it failed. The State Employees Credit Union Foundation and Golden Leaf were two of the very biggest funding partners, and of course 3 key local stakeholder partners were, of course, the county government, our school district, and the town of Windsor, where the apartments are located. So a little bit more detail about our funding partners. So we started this work right in the midst of COVID, and the apartment complex was about $1 million cheaper to build prior to COVID. But of course, COVID came, everything got shut down. So the credit union had lent the foundation some money, but of course we had to go back and ask for additional money from the credit union and the foundation, Golden Leaf Foundation, and they were very willing to help us get those grants we need. So as you can see, the Credit Union Foundation, we have a $3.1 million loan from the credit union with a 0% interest for 15 years. And we have a delayed start on the mortgage payment so we can generate some working capital within our foundation. Of course, like I said, the 527 from Golden Leaf. The town of Windsor, Bertie County, and Bertie County Schools each committed $160,000 to help fill the gap. We had a special appropriation from the General Assembly through our senator at the time, Senator Bazemore, of $100,000. So these last 2, these were 2 defunct foundations that had been holding money for years. And so I asked about those foundations. They was like, if you can get the money, go for it. We always been asking, but we can't get anything. So I went and had one lunch, and I came up with about $90,000. So I don't like to take the credit, but I will take the credit for that one. But they donated the money that was just sitting there that they were not using. So once they knew what we were trying to do with the money, though, they were very willing to release it to the newly formed Education Foundation. So the construction cost is $4.1 million. It ended up being about 4.2 with engineering fees and all that. And we were able to raise right around $4.3 million for this project. So, of course, we are just getting started. No one has moved in yet. And let me just put this, you're all invited to groundbreaking in July. But we anticipating the house being filled for the entire length of the loan. We don't anticipate having any vacancies. We know that these new residents in the town would generate additional tax revenues and fees for the county, and especially the town of Windsor. The district will continue to maintain relationships and communication among stakeholder groups, and we know that's very, very important anyway if we want our students to be successful. We need our stakeholders to invest in the school system, their time, funding, and energy to make this work. We've already started recruiting, and we've been using this apartment complex as a recruiting tool. However, we were at NC State a couple weeks ago, and I think we had one. The other one was like, "Where you located again?" I was like, "Windsor, Bertie." So he didn't even know where it was. He was like, "Thank you, but no, I'm good here." So I guess it's something we just won't ever be able to get. They like the Raleigh area. And of course, the main thing is the lower rate of teacher attrition. That's going to be the main thing. We hope that we can recruit and retain highly qualified teachers to make sure we keep on the positive trajectory that we are already doing. But it's been a great partnership, public and private partnership with our community. It's a level of excitement that we haven't seen in Bertie for a long, long time. And we have people that are not even in the teaching profession asking me how can they get an apartment Well, I told them they need to go back to school and major in teacher ed, and then we can have a conversation about them living in the apartment complex. But that's my brief spiel. All right.
Thank you,
All
Dr.
right.
Smallwood. All right, and with that, I think Julie and I will open it up to any questions on any of the presentations you heard.
Are there any, I'm telling you, it's almost like I have 1,000 questions myself, but we almost need a session just on this, because I imagine, Dr. Mullinex, there is a need such as this across the state, right?
Oh, absolutely,
It's
across the
absolutely
state. I mean,
Innovative like I've never heard.
absolutely. It's so there's typically, like we were talking earlier today, and there's really like 2 reasons why there would need to be a program like this for housing, just thinking about the housing itself, not the grow your owns. But it's typically a high cost of living where they can't afford. You know, I live in an area where a teacher or a police officer probably couldn't afford to buy a home. It would be very difficult. Right now, it's difficult for a 2-income family to purchase a home, especially with interest rates being high. Or it's a rural area where there just aren't houses available. That was what Hertford County looked like. And the other piece to that I think is really important, you heard Dr. Smallwood talk about it, is trying to get people in the community to where they're invested in that community, right? You want them to feel like they're a part of something, and that they, you know, if you move into an area that's very expensive, or you go into an area where it's very expensive to teach and you can't afford to live there and you're living 30 or 45 minutes away, your eyes are probably always kind of glossing over other opportunities that are going to save you gas and commute time and things like that. So very important. I'll also say that our spotlights on these matters have gotten attention from the Department of Education. I don't think a lot of states have had these programs like North Carolina. We've kind of built the roots on educator housing, and it's really starting to grow across the country as we see housing prices and interest rates continue to increase.
Well, more to come. We want to be updated periodically on the success of these models, definitely so. And okay, I'm sorry, we do have a question, Leah.
Yes, thank you. Julie, I was just wondering, I know the answer to this question, but I want everyone to know the answer to this question. Can you share about the return on investment of the Teacher Leadership Council, the Teacher Leadership Council work groups, how they feed into the AIM conference, and how they feed into the work of DPI, of the board in general?
Well, yes.
Just talk about how valuable we are. Thanks.
Well, I think I'm going to pause on that for just a second and continue on something that Dr. Mullinex said, and that was my district. I'm from Rutherford County in the western part of the state, and we're in the beginning parts of building a teacher housing program. Last year alone, our district, I think, lost, and we're a small district, but we lost 11 teachers because there was nowhere to live. So they've gone to other districts where they could find affordable housing. So I just, it is 11 teachers in a small district is monumental and is devastating to our students. So I think it's really important that we're definitely building that. I think the Teacher Leadership Council, to your question, Leah, the return on investment for the time that we're putting into these teachers is, like I said, we are meeting monthly, and those teachers are having their voices valued. They are putting input and feedback on big initiatives that are happening in North Carolina, like the Teacher Working Condition Survey that was rolled out last Friday. We're in our 4th or 5th day on the Teacher Working Condition Survey right now, and we've already seen over 1/3 of the people who are invited to take it have already taken the Teacher Working Condition Survey, which I think is a great investment right now, and our teachers are being used as a voice to really get the new the new survey out, the anonymity piece of it out, the way that we've reduced the number of items on it out. We've definitely been working with Dr. Smith and the school performance grade redesign for months. We met for the first time with him back at the May planning and work session, and I've met with him and his group several times on giving feedback with that. So the fact that teachers And I think this was something that Superintendent Truitt tasked us with, was to close the feedback loop with teachers in the field, that teachers are being brought to the table on a monthly basis to give feedback for things that are happening in the state. While you may not see it every month at the board table, it is happening, and it is happening monthly. And even sometimes I'll have somebody say, hey, I need a group of teachers to give some input on this, and I'll call whoever can come to the table. We'll call in and get insight on that. I know the governor has a governor's teacher advisory council that meets. It's highly important that the superintendent has that as well. And the fact that we've grown it and continue to rotate new people in, from brand new teachers and our beginning teachers to CTE teachers. We've got folks who are pre-K teachers, pre-K special ed teachers, all the way through high school. We've got folks who are working with our future teachers to folks who have been on the ground for 30 plus years. So, and everywhere in between, from almost every single district and multiple charter schools. So the return on investment there is, their time is so valuable, but the fact that we have almost 100 people Zooming in every month for over an hour to give their time to what the work that this agency is doing, I think we're definitely seeing the return on investment just by the fact that the work is being done, the work is solid, and while I've only been in this role for a little over 3 years, I've been invested in this work since I was a regional teacher of the year over 5 years ago. But I've been in public schools as a teacher for over 20 years, and I don't think I've ever seen the amount of teacher voice and teacher interaction as I have with this. And I just think it's thanks that we've had the leadership that Superintendent Truitt and the board has been able to give us to lift up what teachers are doing. And then I would say, being able to have, to your point that we need to hear more, Dr. Oxendine, about what we're doing, to have a whole session on this. Well, come to the AIM conference on shameless plug, but I'll be plugging it every month. Come to the AIM conference. It's October the 7th through the 9th, but the Grow Your Own convening is going to be happening on the 8th. And we will have all these folks. That happened just today. Matt and Stephanie, who know each other, who work together, Matt leaned over and said, I need to talk with her more so that we can figure out what she's doing with this, because we're not doing it like that. So even folks who are doing and engaged with each other in the work need to get together and have that network and learn from each other. And another real quick shameless plug is on the 7th of October, thanks to the ability that Catherine gave us to meet and have some roads forged ahead with our AI work. Sal Khan is going to be our keynote speaker at the conference on October the 7th, and is going to be spending a whole day with educators the entire day of October the 7th at the AIM conference. So you are all invited as my guest, and I hope that you come to the conference and engage with our great educators.
Thank you very much. You got a lot in the last 5 minutes, Jen. You really did. Another question, absolutely.
I want to comment. Oh, Lily, was your hand up?
You started first.
Really quickly, I want to speak particularly to Matt's program, to the Grow Your Own program, and how when we looked at that slide of who those future educators were, a very large push. I know the Governor's Drive Task Force, and many conversations we've had, is not only about recruitment and retention, but specifically along equity lines, the recruitment and retention of diverse teachers. That slide is a direct result of what happens when we engage with the students in our schools right now. When we talk about change in Tier 1 schools, when we have kids like that who are successfully navigating Tier 1 schools to the point of college, who better to come back and be the boots on the ground in our high-need districts? When we talk about interventions that change practice, that grow achievement, these are the kids who are successfully navigating multiple challenges at one time successfully. There is no better solution to the problems that we face in our most pressing districts than the kids on that slide.
Very good. That's an ROI too.
Yes.
And Lily, I think I saw your hand, and I know I'm gonna have to move along, but Lily, you're next.
Okay, I guess this whole little update section of our agenda has been really exciting to see because, you know, we can all say, and I think, you know, most people would say that they value teachers, but this whole little section has really like shown that that districts are putting their money where their mouth is, and like resources, and people are really working hard to keep up the high standards for the teaching profession.
Thank you, Lily. Thank all of you. It's a wonderful presentation. Absolutely. So the last item on the agenda is a consent item, and I'm just going to take a minute and talk through it. This is, you see in your material, board members, the community colleges that are coming to us for initial approval to offer education preparation programs to prepare our, I think in the, probably in the area primarily is in elementary education and maybe EC, just elementary education. So this is based on a framework that we approved. The framework was designed by the Department of Community Colleges a few years ago. We approved that framework, the board did, and the reason for the approval, it was so that we could position ourselves as a board to approve these EPPs, community colleges to offer these preparation programs. So you see the various schools. We have a long list, by the way. This is a growing initiative. So it's another way to fill the pipeline, necessary teachers that we need. So that is the consent item, and that is my agenda for the month.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Let's take a 15-minute break and be back at 3:10. back in session, and we'll finish the afternoon with our last two committees. First, the Education, Innovation, and Charter School Committee, led by Mr. John Blackburn. Mr. Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I serve in this role as Chair of Education, Innovation, and Charter with my Vice Chair, Ms. Jill Candace. Thank you, Jill. Our order of new business is Charter School Review Board update, and Ms. Ashley Vaquero is going to do that for us.
All right, good afternoon. This is Ashley Vaquero with the Office of Charter Schools, and I am giving the February review of the Charter Schools Review Board. So the Charter Schools Review Board met February 5th and 6th. You can see in the materials, there are links to all of the materials as well as the live stream of the meeting. Our main area of business at the February meeting was renewal votes. So there were 3 renewal votes given for a 10-year renewal. So these 3 charter schools, News Charter School, Sugar Creek, and Community School of Davidson, will receive 10-year charters beginning July 1st, 2024. There were 4 schools who received a 7-year renewal. These schools will receive a 7-year term, also July 1st, 2024. Marjorie Williams Academy, Carolina International, Community Public Charter, and Hobgood Charter Academy. And then finally, 7 schools, they're listed here on the slide, received 3-year terms to begin July 1st. We still have 3 schools who will receive a vote. These were originally planned for our meeting next week in March, and we will vote on Ridgeview, or the Charter Board will vote on Ridgeview Charter School. Children's Village Academy and Movement Charter School have been delayed until April to allow for more information to be gathered. So again, those are all the renewal terms that are ending in 2024. The majority of those terms have been voted on, and we have 3 remaining to receive votes either in March or April. Then finally, we had 11 schools that presented to the Charter Board. It is, historically, we have each year around this time a selection of continually low-performing and low-performing schools that present to the Charter Board. Just as an update, in this case, we had 6 that specifically have renewal stipulations from last year's renewals. And so those schools presented and were updated regarding those stipulations. And then finally, to round out the meeting, the Charter Board heard from several DPI staffers. So federal programs presented information regarding a renewal school, Children's Village Academy. Ridgeview Charter School leadership came and they're recommended for a non-renewal, so they had an opportunity to present once more to the Charter Board. Ms. Alexis Schaus presented on funding in arrears, which I know you are all familiar with. And Mr. Fafaria presented on the charter renewal policy. So several presentations from DPI as well rounded out that 2-day meeting, and we meet next Monday for our March meeting. Any questions?
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Mr. Vice Chair?
This is not a question really, it's a comment. And when I look at our constitutional obligations, it includes oversight of all public schools. And all public schools includes the definition of charter schools. And I've looked at the renewals report and appreciated getting it. And I'm not suggesting necessarily would make any form of a different decision than has been made one way or the other. I'm not making a suggestion. But I will say there's a lot of information there that would lead to a lot of questions to get a good understanding for oversight purposes. And so the fact that we're going through a procedure where we don't really get access to that, or we don't really have a meaningful conversation about that information, is a process I wish that we were not going through. And I feel like it does curb somewhat on what our responsibilities are under the Constitution.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Any other comments or questions?
If I could just sort of add to that, I think maybe then what we're talking about is ensuring that the recommendations that come before us comply with the guidelines that are in place that are adopted by the board. Is that what we're saying? And that information is not necessarily part of the presentation.
Thank you. We'll pass those comments along to CSRB. Thank you, Ashley. I appreciate your hard work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have one action on first read, EICS 1, new Cooperative Innovation High School Program. Application recommendations, and hello.
Hello.
How are you, Michelle?
I'm well,
Thank you so much, Mr. Blackburn.
Glad you're here.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Last month, we went over this awesome report regarding Career and College Promise. And in this report, we also reviewed the 2 new Cooperative Innovative High School applications. And and it's coming to you as a separate item. I apologize for that oversight. But we do have Dare County Early College High School that we are bringing to you, and the Joint Advisory Committee has reviewed that application. All that is on your e-board, as well as Rockingham County CTE Innovation High School. Our Dare County school is the first in Dare County, which we are super, super excited about, in that they'll be really focused on the target populations, as well as ensuring that every student there leads with some type of post-secondary credential. Super excited for Dare County to be joining our little dots on the map. And then Rockingham County, this is their second one in Rockingham County, but this one is really focused more on CTE innovation. So again, super excited with their goal being all their students will earn at least one industry recognized credential or certificate or associate's degree. So we're just super excited. The Joint Advisory Committee, which are representatives from the UNC system, our independent colleges and universities, and the community college system, and our staff have reviewed these and bring these recommendations to you. The Board of Community Colleges is also looking at this next week, and then they'll go to the General Assembly, if approved by you all, and that board for final approval.
Thank you. So are there any questions on the cooperative high schools? Okay, so that's action on first reading, Mr. Chair. The second one is we heard the amazing report last month, and Michelle Coltrane referenced that, the report to the General Assembly, A Career and College Promise. I don't think we need to go over that again, but that was a great report. So that will be action, that'll be our second action item. So we have one discussion item today. Our next, and I'll cover that. Our next item is continued discussion of the amendment for State Board Policy CHTR 007. We're continued to engage in conversation with members of the Charter School Review Board and the Office of Charter Schools. Our director, Mr. Fafario, presented to the Charter Schools Review Board last month. The primary substantive concern from CSRB was around the definition of comparable, which was historically set at being within 5 points of the local school administration unit. The proposal Mr. Fafario took to them would have been kept comparable at 5 points for 3-year and 5-year renewal, but it would changed it to 3 points for a 7-year or 10-year renewal. During their question answer, this is a CSRB discussion with Mr. Fafario, multiple CSRB members indicated that they didn't like that the definition of comparable was tied to proficiency score only, even at 5 points. They felt that other indications should be considered. Mr. Fafario brought that discussion back to myself, Ms. Kamnitz, and our board chair and vice chair. We agreed that a study for alternative measures of comparability is a good idea and are asking the CSRB to move forward with bringing us some initial recommendations. In the meantime, we know it's imperative that we revise this policy to bring it into compliance with the law and ensure that CSRB actions and the state board policy are consistent with one another. So in the draft you have now, which is in your board portal, we have set the definition for comparable back to what it has been historically at 5 points. And we will look at changes to strengthen that definition in the future. The other changes you see in this draft are related to process and responsive to Mr. Favario's discussion with Ms. Beccario and her members of the CSRB. Chair Davis has asked CSRB Chair Bruce Friend to present this draft to his board next week, and provide recommendations to us. I'm also in regular conversations with Mr. Friend and Dr. Eldridge, and we stand ready to take action on this policy in April. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Yes, I have a quick question, maybe, yes, it is a question. Along with the rethinking the term, the concept of comparability or comparability, it seems like I remember, I know some charters are, I don't know how many the number might be, but they're not really located within their, for the lack of a better word, like the parent LEA. So I wonder if, as we rethink comparability, we will also give some consideration to some language around to what are we comparing, or with what, so that the geography is spelled out in the policy.
Thank you, Dr. Oxon. That's a very valid question, and it's one that the CSRB has discussed, and we are in continued discussions talking to them about that. So this is our recommendation, and then remember, we can always amend our recommendations based upon what we think is best for renewals. So I think that's a great question, and it's already under consideration.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Blackburn. That takes us to our final committee of the day, Student Learning and Achievement, led by Ms. Jill Kamnitz. Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair Davis, and Dr. Olivia Oxenham and I work on this committee together. We will start off, as always, with new business and the standards revision updates. Dr. Day.
I'm used to good morning, but this is good afternoon for our standards update.
Said the best for last.
The best for last, that's right. Just as a reminder, board policy SCOS 012, that guides our process, that content standards are reviewed and revised every 5 to 7 years to make sure they are clear and relevant. And then we also have the internal procedures manual, which is linked if you want lots and lots of details on how we do this process. So we'll start with healthful living. Not a lot of updates this month. The DRC analyzed their data from draft 2, so that survey went out, it closed, data's in, and they are analyzing and they created their report. The writers will also come back together and create their draft 3, and that is the draft that will come to the board when ready for discussion and action. For our world languages, the survey just closed March 4th, and so we will organize that data, and then the cycle begins again with the data review committee, looking at the data, creating their report, and then the writers will create draft 3. So they're close to that final draft as well. For arts, which is very relevant for this month because it's Arts in Our Schools month, so lots of performances and student art going on this month. We released draft 2 survey February 27th, and this is the very last survey that goes out. So it's a very general survey for everyone. It'll close March 31st, and then that same cycle will happen where the data review committee comes together, analyzes the data, creates their report, and then we get to a draft 3. But we're really excited today to bring draft 2 to you for those arts areas as information. The survey has gone out, but we like to present them to you to let you know where we are and what those look like. So for K-12 arts, we are broken down into 4 content areas within the arts, and so there are 4 separate data review committees and 4 separate writing teams that are working across those content areas. So 4 content areas, 4 different teams, and 2 consultants that are working on it. So a lot of work that's happened over the last several months. A lot of other states in the area of arts, K-12 arts, have come and asked questions around what we're doing and how we're doing it and what that's going to look like. So we are leading the way in these K-12 art standards review. Just as a reminder, the data review report is based on survey responses, data both qualitative and quantitative. The DRC comes together, they create their conclusions and their recommendations, and then they hand that over to the writers. Here, the next slide shows some examples of those charts from the data. You'll see the pinkish color is keep from draft 1. So overwhelmingly, the content, the feedback was that the content, we want to keep the content, is what the field was saying. The feedback that we did receive, which we did receive quite a bit of feedback, was mostly around the organization of the standards and the number of objectives. So the DRC and the writers took that into consideration and consolidated quite a few of those objectives to get to draft 2. On the next slide it shows a snapshot of a conclusion, and this is for dance, K-12 dance. 4 content areas are dance, music, theater arts, and visual arts. What is very different about the arts standards is that they have created 4 common strands. So connect, create, present, and respond are common across all 4 content areas. They stay the same. From there, they have 8 standards, and they are calling those the big 8. And those 8 standards fall within 2 per strand. And those standards are common across all the content areas. So you're going to see a lot of streamline and alignment across those standards and content areas, but where you see the difference for each of the content areas is in the objectives. So we have commonality in the strands and the standards, and differentiation in the objectives depending on the content area. On the next slide is just a snapshot of their work. You'll see right over here for number 1, DPI, so our team inputted the data into that part of the spreadsheet. The DRC worked right there in the middle where they made recommendations on keep, change, or remove, and then reported where they came up with that conclusion, what data they were looking at. And then over on the far left, the writers got a look at everything that happened across the data and the DRC, and then they came up with their draft standards. The next slide just gives some trends and themes that came out of that last DRC report for each of the areas. I'm not going to read them all, but there were a couple similarities overall, and one was definitely around vertical alignment. They wanted to make sure there was clear alignment from grade to grade and through their proficiency levels. There was also an ask for an increase of rigor or verb, so they really took a look at those verbs at the very beginning of the standard to make sure that they were in alignment. And then an ask for discipline-specific language. I will say I had to Google some of the theater verbs. I was not very familiar with some of the theater terms, and so they are keeping note of that for the glossary so that parents can understand, administrators can understand what that discipline-specific vocabulary means and looks like in those content areas. On the next slide just begins the writer's work. They created a common framework. So they went a little above and beyond their writing task, and they created essential questions, draft essential questions, and draft I-CANs that align with those common strands and standards. They began work in January, and they worked by teams across the disciplines, so you can see the disciplines there. And we'll talk about how theater and music is broken apart in just a minute when we look at the drafts. An example of a common standard is around copyright and open domain. Across all of dance, music, theater arts, and visual arts, that is a common piece of knowledge and content that teachers are teaching our students in those areas. So now we'll just look at a snapshot. So these are not all the standards or all the objectives. This is just a snapshot of draft 2. These are the dance standards. So you're going to see it starts with I. That's intermediate, and that's that proficiency level. For most of the standards, K-8 are grade level, and then beyond 8, we go into the proficiency levels. So this is intermediate, and the strand PR is present. So they're working on improving and demonstrating their technique in this standard and objective for dance. Next, we have general music, K-12 general music. This level is beginning, B is for beginning, and then the PR is present. Again, they're working on their technique and improving and demonstrating. The next one is another music draft standard. This one is an intermediate, and it's also present, so there's a common, we wanted to show you that strand for present. Music was split up between general music and vocal and instrumental music based on feedback from the field. General music is more of the study of music. It's more holistic. You're thinking about touching many different disciplines within music, and it's around student creation and expression. When we get into vocal and instrumental music in secondary, that's more specialized ensemble. Those types of really specialized vocal and instrumental courses. Next, we have the theater arts. Objective and more than one standard, and it is present again on that one. And I'm going to come back to this in just a second, but the next one is a split with theater arts, and it's technical theater arts. When we looked at the general theater arts, the first one, that is for those students that are really interested in writing and performing. The technical theater arts are everything behind the scenes. Set building, costume design, lighting, sound, all of those pieces that some students who don't want to perform and write can still use those skills. So it's a whole different set of students that come in and use those skills, build those skills, which are very, very marketable, very durable type of skills to be able to build a set and work on lighting. They can take those skills with them. So that is a change within the standard course of study that they're recommending for Draft 2. And then the last one is K-12 Visual Arts. This again is intermediate, so it's one of the secondary standards, and it is present. It is the same where they are K-8 by grade level, and then beyond that they get into the proficiency. And the very last one we wanted to show you across all content areas within the arts, how they look when we talk about that similar standard. So this is 5th grade, and CN is Connect, and this is the first standard. So it's talking about relating those artistic ideas and works with all these different types of context. So you're gonna see dance, music, theater arts, and visual arts, and you'll notice that the connection here is with social studies. The current standard course of study has a very strong connection with social studies, and the field has asked for that to stay. So there's a lot of collaboration and integration that can happen across the arts and social studies. So when you look at 4th grade art standards, you're gonna see a lot of North Carolina, because that's what we have in our social studies standards. In 5th grade, you're gonna see a lot of that US type of connections like we have in social studies. I went fast, but that's it.
Any questions for Dr. Day? Dr. Day?
Just a quick question. You know, I'm taking a closer look at the frame on technical theater. That has so many implications for CTE.
It does.
Doesn't it?
It does.
And also, if you, maybe this is unfair, but do you recall right off the top of your head how many objectives there are? Because you said snapshot. I get that.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look. I can get that.
Offline, you
Yeah.
can just share it with me. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Vice Chair Fenton.
Do we continue the theme, you know, tying to social studies when the students get to high school with world
Yes.
history and things like that? So it's just,
All the way
it
through.
goes sort of like a pairing with social studies throughout. Thank you.
Thought that was interesting that Any other questions? The end is near, although there are more standards not looming, but this all so many going on all at once that I think we're almost done. Thank you, Dr. Day. Dr. Wren, are we ready for the next one? Okay, our other item of new business is a presentation on the artificial intelligence guidance that was just shared with our districts recently. And we have the whole team here to talk about it, starting off with Dr. Wren.
We do. Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, Superintendent Truitt, and honorable members of our board. One of the things that we know is that AI is here. It's here to stay. Our students are often ahead of us and already using that. And having worked in the school system for many years, I know there's many teachers who are already very much ahead of the curve on that. That's why it was very important for us to put out some very actionable, step-by-step guidance on how to safely, responsibly use AI at a school. So there is some guidelines available. And so one of the things that we want to show you is a brief demonstration on how a student might use AI. And we're actually going to use the ChatGPT platform. I know that's often called OpenAI, but generative AI has really changed. Like, AI has been here a long time. We've had Google Nest, we've had Siri, but this is quite different because it is a transformative language model which talks like a human language. So it's very important for us to understand this. And I have to say that I've got to thank my team because I shared with them a vision of what guidance looks like. And so I need to thank Dr. Ashley McBride and Vera Cubero, who really have been national leaders, and I don't say that lightly. We were the 4th state to put guidance out, but our guidance has been recognized by the U.S. Department of Education and highlighted in their National Technology Plan just a few weeks ago. And we've also been recognized by many ed tech companies as having the best guidance out there in the nation now. And Vera has been working with many partners, is being asked to do many of these things because we have been leaders. And our motivation to be leaders in this truly goes back to our spirit of leading the nation and the world, really, with digital teaching and learning. And understanding that it can be scary if you're not exposed to it, but if you understand it and how it works, and teachers understand it, then they can put guardrails in place. So we have total faith in our educators and what they're able to do. So Superintendent Truitt and I are going to just do a little bit of a role play with you. And Superintendent Truitt is a very hard high school English teacher, and I am her student. And so I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Truitt.
And I was a very hard teacher. Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, we are in an American Lit class right now, which in most districts is English 3. And I am going to give you all an assignment. And Vanessa here, Dr. Wren, is one of my students, along with you all. And in particular, Vanessa, your assignment is to write a 1,000-word essay comparing and contrasting the principles of the Declaration of Independence with the themes of Shakespeare's Hamlet. So that is your assignment for this evening, and it is due tomorrow. Wow. Yeah, that's hard, isn't it?
Here I come.
We've got AI.
Let me get some
She's for me. She does not realize that I have dance practice, and then I have to go to work. And there's absolutely no way I can write this by heart. I don't even understand what things are. I don't know what to do. But I have this little app that my friends have showed me that I can use, and I'm just gonna put it in there. I'm gonna turn it in, and I don't think she'll catch it. So I'm gonna type this into OpenAI and see what happens.
All right, Mr. Fafana, can we go back to the beginning, please?
7 less than seconds is my essay.
So I would just like to read the introduction. The Declaration of Independence, crafted in 1776 by Thomas Jefferson, is a foundational document in American history that articulates the principles of individual rights, equality, and the pursuit of happiness. On the other hand, William Shakespeare's Hamlet, written in the early 17th century, is a timeless tragedy that explores the themes of revenge, morality, and the complexities of human nature. Despite the significant gap in time and genre, these two works share some striking similarities in their exploration of human values and societal ideals. This essay will delve into the comparative analysis of the principles found in the Declaration of Independence and the themes of Shakespeare's Hamlet, shedding light on their interconnectedness of literature and historical documents. And then the first one that it references is individual rights and autonomy. So I would love to continue reading this, but in the interest of time, will not do so. But want to point out that when Miss Vanessa hands this in, as her teacher, I may or may not recognize that she completed this assignment using ChatGPT. Furthermore, what I would argue is that in this day and age, knowing that this tool exists, if I don't give her guidance on whether or not she can use ChatGPT to do this assignment, whether or not she cheats is really on me. Or how I define this as cheating or not is on me. And for that reason, Vanessa and her team created the usage guide, which is what is getting all this attention nationally, on how teachers can determine whether something or not is cheating or not. And so if I were to say to Vanessa and to my class, you may not use ChatGPT on this assignment, you must do it yourself. Well, now Vanessa has cheated. However, if she has a green, which is full AI use with human oversight, that specifically says to her, you may use ChatGPT in any way you want, and you must cite the use of AI using proper MLA or APA citation, and links to AI chats must be submitted with final admission. Well, now she hasn't cheated. However, what might be a better way to assign this would be for the teacher to modify it a bit and let her know what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. And if I don't want my students to use ChatGPT or to cheat, I might want to characterize the assignment this way. How would your life in America be different today if the Declaration of Independence were characterized by the themes found in Shakespeare's Hamlet? That would allow Vanessa to personalize her essay while still demonstrating to the teacher that she understands the themes found in Hamlet and the principles found in the Declaration of Independence. And so I could then say to her, you may use ChatGPT or Google or any other form of technology to get a feel for what those themes were. Maybe we looked at the Declaration of Independence earlier in the year, or maybe because it's English 3, we haven't even had World Lit yet where we read Hamlet. And so maybe she's not, I want her to show me that she knows how to learn, and she has to go figure out for herself what the themes in here, I mean, how often are we assigned a task in the current workplace that we don't know how to do? That's why learning, having a learner's mindset is one of our Portrait of a Graduate competencies. But moreover, if I wanted her to, if I wanted to give an assignment that allows her to use ChatGPT but also do her own work, I can do that now because I have this acceptable use scale. And it doesn't mean that it's going to eradicate cheating. What it means is that it's going to give the teacher an acceptable use guidance policy that parents, students, and teachers all use. And now I can help my students better define what cheating is and render consequences when necessary. So Vanessa, I'll let you take it from here.
Oh, very well said. So just
And
like.
I'm going to tell your mom you cheated.
I'm a terrible student. But just like we had to teach students, when we were putting computers in their hands or when they were getting computers at home, we had to teach them you can't cut and paste off of Wikipedia and turn that in. So it's not much different than that. But having these structures in place is what our entire goal is. So we can have good, rich conversations about what teachers should be expecting and how they can handle these things. Certainly we know there are fallacies in some of the tools that are out there. We also know many of our ed tech tools are already embedding modules that are somewhat safe outside of the World Web language models to do that. So that is exactly why we wanted to demonstrate to you how easily this can be done, but also how teachers have the skill set and equipping them to modify lessons and teach students. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ashley McBride and Ms. Vera Cubero, who have spent so much time with research and working with major partners such as AI for Education and other partners to make sure we had this right in North Carolina.
Thank you, Superintendent Truitt. Thank you, Dr. Wren, for sharing that demonstration. I would invite the board that if you guys want some more in-depth how we work with teachers on lesson planning and things along those lines, not only would we invite you to request that, and we're more than happy to do that with you, but also request that if you'd like to join us for our AI summits or any of our AI collaboratives, we can definitely get you the dates and have you come join us and learn with us and our educators there. We do, slide, thank you. We want to make sure that there's a clear understanding, not only for the board, but for all of our stakeholders as to what generative AI is. As Dr. Wren mentioned, AI itself is not new. We've all been using AI when we get a suggested watch list from our favorite streaming service or when we open our cell phones with facial recognition. But we are looking at now generative AI, which are programs that take all the information that's out there and create something that is brand new. Which, if you think about it, that is how cultures, since existence started, actually grew. But we have so much information, it is impossible for our students and ourselves, as I try to dive deep into all of the different ed tech things, it's impossible for us to really dive as deep as we need to in all of those things that have been out there for years. So AI is a tool to help gather all of those things and help us to move our culture along. These tools, while they've been used for years in various specialized industries and have now become they've now become mainstream for use, which is really where we are now. With that expanded access, it's imperative that our students learn not only how, but more importantly, when and why to use AI. And with all the interest in this emerging technology and the questions coming from the field and the concerns about cheating and inappropriate use, we knew that guidance was necessary. After months of research and a collaborative effort led by Vera Cubero, we have guidelines for the effective and responsible use of AI in North Carolina schools. While we are the 4th state to share out AI guidance for schools, we have been recognized, thank you for bringing up that quote, we have been recognized as being the best and providing the most practical guidance. It's important to note that this guidance is organized to align with the goals of the State Digital Learning Plan. If you could go to the next slide. One more. Thank you. Our state's technology plan helps us to ensure that all technology that's implemented into our schools is done through thoughtful goal setting and planning, as you see in our leadership and vision. It's set where we prepare and support all of the individuals who are actually implementing these technologies through our human capacity piece, making sure that the learning focus always remains on curricular goals and not just using technology for the sake of using technology, which is our curriculum instruction and assessment piece. Whew, that was a long sentence. Ensuring that our students and staff data is secure and protective, which is our data privacy and cybersecurity piece. And finally, making sure that the tech and infrastructure backing that with making sure that that is sustainably implemented so that it can continue to grow. That's our tech and infrastructure piece. All of this comes together to ensure the best possible learning experiences for our students. So now I'm going to have Vera Cubero. I'm going to hand the presentation over to you and talk about our AI guidance and all the things inside.
Hey, thank you for having us. And I'm happy to talk about this because it was a great effort, but it was very needed. As we were going into districts and working with teachers and across the state, we realized that people really had not gotten the guidance they needed, and they were looking to the state for that guidance. So I commend Superintendent Truitt and Dr. Wren for allowing and leading and as always being leaders in technology across the nation. So our leadership and vision section, as Ashley said, that is kind of the beginning of everything. It has to do with planning at a district level, having the district leaders get together. And first of all, they need to understand the technology before they can really create effective policies. And so training those folks and then getting together and creating the policies that will guide implementation in the district. And you can go to the next slide if you like. Okay, and this is just a simple little graphic that we've used to kind of illustrate on a student-friendly level what the appropriate use is, because our guidance all the way through, we really do focus on responsible use. Because of course, I mean, we all in this room know that there are ways it can be used irresponsibly, just like any other tool can. And so this was just kind of putting that in student-friendly language, always the human in control, using it to enhance your creativity and your thinking, not to replace it. And so we also have a roadmap, and this was borrowed from AI for Education. We kind of adapted it a little bit, but we wanted to make sure that we're making it very clear as we go across and teach. We do talk about the importance of making sure that our students are eventually learning how to use these tools, but we don't want to put the cart in front of the horse, so to speak. There is an appropriate way to do that, and that is starting at the top with the district leaders creating guidance, and then making sure that the staff are well-trained and comfortable with using it before we roll out to the student platforms in schools. And we know students are using it on their own already, but before we have them using it on school accounts and school devices, we wanted to make sure that all the staff were trained. And then, of course, because it changes so much, it would be a constant cycle of assessing and progressing, because literally something happens every day. Really big something happens about every day in this world. So, and then that brings us to the human capacity piece, which is all about increasing the digital or the AI literacy of every user involved. That's teachers and students and staff at the district level. It's going to be really important going forward. Students really will not be digitally literate anymore if they're not AI literate. In the world that they're graduating into, that's going to be a very important part of their learning. And so, as I said, we don't want to put the cart in front of the horse, so we're not encouraging schools to just open up AI before we get the training in place for staff, but they can still learn about it without necessarily learning with it. And so that process can be starting now. And so the curriculum and instruction part is the one that has the most resources. It's kind of a playbook of sorts, where we have included lots of resources so that district leaders can have something to take that's actually practical and can be used. And so there's several of those resources are included here. We talk about how some possible use cases for staff and for students. And then we've included some tools, and if you want to go to the next page, I think a couple of those. So these are two of the resources. One is because these tools are very much different than Google, and people who don't know that will approach them like they would an internet search. We have featured a prompting framework that helps you get the best response right away, and then also just some tips on how to use it to reduce the chance of hallucinations or incorrect information, which is one of the issues that we teach about them. And then the next slide also has a framework for responsible use every time, and that is on the AI for Education website. I collaborated with them on creating that, but it's just a reminder, something to help build common understanding and common language among all the users of what you need to do every time. Evaluate the response, verify all the data, edit the response or follow up to get what you need. Always revise and put it in your own words, put your own voice into it. And then also that you're responsible. You can't blame the AI. Whenever a human uses it, it's a partnership, but the human's the one that bears the responsibility. And you can continue, and that's the resource that you've already seen, which is important as well when we get students using these tools as part of their education, that we have, again, a common understanding, common language, so that sometimes it may be a 0, but sometimes it may be a 4, or it may be a 2, but that just kind of helps build that common understanding. And then we did want to make sure that we address in our guidance AI detectors, because that continues to be something that causes a lot of strife between students and staff. And the reality is that no matter how much the companies that create these tools claim that they are reliable, they are not. The very best is 90% reliable. And when you take 100 kids and 10 of them have been falsely accused of cheating, that's not a number that we can live with. And so they range from about 50% accuracy to about 90%. And the reality is the technology is changing too quickly, and they probably will never be one that is 100% reliable, because AI created content is getting more and more like human created content all the time. And so we have to really change our mindsets and pedagogy about how we teach and how we create assignments, as they illustrated very beautifully earlier. And if you kind of think about the 2 assignments they demonstrated earlier, not only is the second one going to be more AI resistant, but it also employs a lot more critical thinking. It's just a much better assignment all the way around. And so that's going to be an uncomfortable truth that educators have to face, and it's going to be hard, but it really is going to have to shift. That mentality's got to shift, because the technology is not going away. It's only spreading more and more every day. So we very clearly caution against the use of AI detectors as a way of determining whether a kid cheated or not in our guidance. And this is just a little more about that, which I've kind of covered already. I jumped ahead of myself a little there, but and we also do a lot. We had Tim Weiss, our K-12 cybersecurity specialist, on our team. to kind of advise us, and we also had Diane Delaney focusing on the data privacy piece as well. But that is one of the concerns, is we really have to make sure all users are well aware of what personally identifiable information is, about all of the laws that govern every other technology. They govern this technology as well. And so we've got to make sure we're educating all of our users about all of those laws. And you can go ahead to the next one. And this just kind of talks about conducting security audits, and then also when you're getting these tools, there has to be a really high bar for any kind of technology in today's world. And I'm sure you all are aware of all the data privacy and cybersecurity concerns. And so there is a high bar for all of these tools. And right now, a lot of them really do not meet it in an educational setting. But there are more and more tools being developed all the time that are really focusing on data privacy and are following the rules that we have to follow in the K-12 space. But most of those tools are not going to be free. They have a free version, but they're freemium. It means that you can't utilize all of the things without paying for them. So that's going to be a pain point also for our schools, but we really have to be careful about what tools we put our kids on. And that brings us to the technology and infrastructure. Another thing we really caution about is making sure we're always following the terms of use. There are anything that is a student-facing tool that the student actually creates an account on, pretty much across the board, they're at least age 13 and up. And so we have to make sure that we're always following those terms of service, make sure we read them well. And then, of course, CTOs have a lot more things to be concerned about as well, like where the data is being stored, what's being done with it, what kind of data is being collected. And so we have some guidance in there about that as well. And then, in addition to that, we have a list of references, some free, high-quality PD that we vetted for both for district leaders, for teachers, and for students. And again, quite a few of the student resources that we show can be used by students to learn about AI, even if they're not able to learn with AI in the school setting. And so we've kind of divided them into with AI and without. And then we have a full list of references, everything that we use to research. And that is the end of our guidance. Okay.
Any questions?
I want to add one piece to this, though, that I think is important. We are very aware of the biases that are in these platforms, so we address that as well. You've heard of many that have been in the news recently with some of those biases, and we've seen some of our social media companies being held accountable for some of the things there. And so we certainly are watching what is happening with this arena as well, but that is part of our training, and awareness is where we have to be. And I just had a sidebar conversation with our student advisor, Lillian, and I said, have you used this? And so, Lindland, do you want to share your experience?
I've used AI for fun, but then like when you're given an assignment and, you know, there's not a whole lot of, you know, background to it, I've used AI for like, to brainstorm and to like get ideas. And I've never fully used AI for an assignment, but I've always, you know, it's a good place to start and brainstorm ideas for, especially when you're writing college and scholarship essays and answers, you know, almost every day.
Thank you for that. And, you know, when generative AI came out in November 2022, we all saw the headlines, jobs will be replaced. The legal field, the CPA field, they were going to take the biggest hits. Certainly, we've learned enough now to know that productivity is really what is being increased. So student productivity, teacher productivity, all worker productivity. So I just wanted to highlight that as well in case you had questions. So thank you for allowing us to share.
And the 2 slides that we missed. We have the AI Summit, which we are putting together for leaders. This is for district teams of about 3 or 4 to come in and really talk about AI policy, AI guidance for their school districts, and digging deeper into that. And we are having one in the West and one in the East so that it is accessible across the state. And then we also have our AI Collaborative. Our AI Collaborative is 2 groups that are coming together, one West group, one East group. We have teachers, we have coaches, we have librarians, we have tech directors, we have all of these groups, and their sole goal is to not only learn about AI, but also to create resources that can be used effectively inside schools with students and with professional development for teachers. So that way we have some grab and go things for our educators who are already, burdened enough with plenty of other things. And we wanted to end with this quote: attempting to enforce broad bans on AI, it's a futile effort that widens the digital divide between students with independent access to AI on personal devices and students dependent on school or community resources. Closing the digital divide in the age of AI still begins with internet connectivity, device availability, and basic digital literacy. And that comes directly from the Teach AI toolkit.
I do have a question. I'm looking at this rubric, and I think that's very useful. It's a very good fundamental tool to help teachers make this, segue into this world. But if you could help me, I'm looking at level 3, AI for specified task completion. So my question is this: how do we, as educators, I think at classroom teachers and also college professors, get in a position of a predicament where the student is over-reliant on AI when creating papers, scholarly works, or whatever the type might be, such that they lose the ability to paraphrase information and put things in their own words. I mean, I can just see, I would never allow a student to submit a paper and just, a 15-page paper and just do a citation or a reference to APA 7th edition and allow that to, no way.
And we would never advocate for a whole paper to be turned in. Like, Vanessa's paper would still be not enough, even if her teacher had told her, cite your source. Well, the whole paper was written by ChatGPT. So, she cited her source, but that's not enough.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yeah. And this is going to be something that we have to train students to do. Just like, I'm old enough to remember when the internet came out. And it was the same thing, suddenly kids could just go online and find things and just copy and paste them in. And there was a lot of training that had to go into teaching students not only how to cite, but how to take something and put it in their own words. Right. And that's part of that every framework too, is that you always revise and you always put your own voice into it.
Absolutely. So I'm thinking 3 looks like maybe on the rubric.
When it says specified, so the teacher might say, okay, you can use it to brainstorm, you have to write yourself, but then you can use it to evaluate your writing and get suggestions.
Right.
So the teacher would just kind of recommend. The 4 level is one that I would say being built up to. That's more like how it's going to be used in the real world, though, by professionals. But it's something that they would need to be trained along the way. It's a continuum.
Excellent teaching, though.
Okay, thank you.
It does strike me to your question, the students have to be trained, the teachers have to be trained first.
Teachers must be trained first. That's it.
As one of these documents
Yeah.
that you start with,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yep.
So I've got Ms. Jones and then I've got Superintendent Truitt.
You can go first.
Well, thank you. So I'm glad you brought up higher education because, and the examples that have been given, because we've been, when I was a turnaround coach in underperforming schools, that was one of the things that we tried to do, was to get teachers to stop giving assignments where kids could simply Google the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have been in classrooms, not in the not too distant past, where the assignment was, if we're going back to this, wanting kids to demonstrate their understanding of the principles of the Declaration of Independence and how, or separately, the themes of Hamlet. At least if you have teachers who are asking kids to compare and contrast those 2 very disparate documents.
Mm-hmm.
As the introduction pointed out, they are from different time periods and different countries. That's great, but I'm still seeing teachers giving multiple choice tests, asking students to identify the differences and similarities between those 2 things, as opposed to, I would say even asking them to do a compare and contrast essay on those 2 things is still not going far enough. It's the, as Vera pointed out, it's that last assignment where you're asking a student to perhaps make it more real world, as in how might your life be different today? I mean, if I could give you a science example, asking a student to define photosynthesis is a very basic activity that one could very easily Google. Asking a student to explain what would happen if you woke up tomorrow morning and photosynthesis stopped. That is an assignment that requires critical thinking, that even ChatGPT could do that. I'm not suggesting that ChatGPT couldn't formulate a response to that, but this so goes back to the fact that I don't know that we did a very good job with our pre-service teachers of helping them to do lesson plans that were aligned to, Lily wants to say something too, that were aligned to our standard course of study and that challenge students to do something that they can't just Google.
Yep, and I would agree. I mean, we've been preaching and teaching that we need to have students doing more critical thinking long before ChatGPT came up.
Right.
But now it absolutely is going to force that issue. It's going to make us make that leap that we've been needing to make for a long time anyway.
Ms. Truitt just said a great deal of what I was talking about. It will, and I say this as an educator, it will forcibly move educators into higher order thinking in terms of our summative assessments, but there is no generative AI replacement for formative learning in our classroom.
No, there's not.
The skills and the teaching for our kids to fundamentally understand the text referenced in that summative assessment are still reliant on in-class, everyday practices. Thing number two, I very much appreciated the various appendixes. I would say that I think one that will be very helpful is one for parents, because currently there is a significant pushback from critics of AI and people just concerned about education, and some of that's grounded in fear. I'll go as far to say a lot of that is grounded in fear. We don't want kids who don't know how to do X not thinking about the fact that they're going to live in a world where X is the basis and they need to have Y and Z. So we have to fundamentally change our cognition of what learning means to application synthesis, things that prepare them. The third thing I wanted to speak to is the point that you guys brought up, and I was so thankful that you did, about the role of equity in AI. That I was at Google. I had the good fortune to be at Google last month with the National Teachers of the Year, and one of the conversation points that I continued to raise was our tools are only as good as their operators. That AI, like all other technologies, will either exacerbate existing inequities or they will be used to address those inequities. And that there's no computer control for the morals and the mindsets of the people using them. And we have to devote ourselves intentionally to allowing these tools to be tools of equity.
Yes, we do.
This is why we can't ban ChatGPT in our districts.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I would add to that too, that it really is going to kind of increase the digital divide for students who don't have computers, because now not only do they not have a device, they don't have this powerful technology at their disposal. And so, and connectivity, same thing.
And I'm very glad you brought up the need for parent resources in here. That is something that our collaboratives are working on. And this is a living document. AI is changing every 20 seconds. And we are working on making sure that we keep this updated. So that is why if anybody were to have printed this off at one point, you're gonna want to go back to the site and double check and make sure things didn't change. So we're trying to keep it updated, and that's hopefully something we'll be adding to.
Ms. Kamitz,
I just think, just bouncing off some of the things that have already been discussed, I've had teachers in the not distant past who gives you a multiple choice assessment, says you can use the internet however you choose, and you Google the question and there's Quizlets made up of, word for word the exact test that we
something that we're gonna have to teach a whole society on how to use. I mean, I remember arguing with math teachers when I was little. Why do I have to learn how to add this when I grow up? I'm gonna have a calculator in my pocket. You know, so we're gonna have to teach whole generations on how to use this tool rather than just keep stuffing it in the background and pretending we're not gonna have access to it.
Well, and to that point, what those of us who've been working in this space for the past year know is that if you don't know how to write a prompt, you can't use ChatGPT effectively. If you don't know how to check for hallucinations, which is what the AI world means when they are talking about errors, you're not going to be effective at using AI. If you don't know how to check for biases, you're also not going to be effective. There is a skill set associated with this that is critical for educators to use, and I must say that I'm so glad that you all are addressing the parent component, but we must remember that it is incumbent upon our local superintendents to either take our guidance and make it gospel, or create your own using our guidance, which includes letting parents know, because the department cannot force this on local districts or parents.
The other piece of this, and Chair Davis, this goes to the conversation you and I had in the hall during the break. We knew with science of reading that EPPs had to be part of the work. And we were talking about in this math, what we're doing in math, where do the EPPs fit in? Same thing with this. I mean, they are going to have to be just as on top of it as you guys have been, because our teachers who are being prepared right now to enter the classroom have got to understand this.
And we have a wonderful partnership with the NCICU and UNC. And we have a subgroup of professors from EPPs who work on professional development that aligns with our state's digital learning plan, which, as I said, is an umbrella for all of the emerging technologies. So AI is one of our big focuses this year as we're talking about revamping and reworking some of the professional learning that we've already designed for those EPPs.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry, I have to say
One more, and then we're
sorry.
going to keep going.
This is why it's so exciting that Sal Khan, who created Khan Academy, is going to be our keynote speaker, and that also as part of our math work, we are speaking with the legislature about funding Khanmigo, which is the Khan Academy AI platform, which is one of 2 AI platforms right now that is safe for students to use at school and at home in terms of cybersecurity and threat detection. But what's neat about Khanmigo is that not only does it have a student tutorial function with a chatbot that can tutor a student, but it also has a teacher function. And we will be able to load in the North Carolina Standard Course of Study to Khanmigo, so that a teacher can, just like we gave it a prompt and it spat out the essay, we can allow for Khanmigo, for a teacher to be able to ask it to create a lesson plan for a specific topic or book or math unit that is aligned to the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. And that is something that our teachers, many teachers, are lacking in the knowledge of the need and the know-how to align their daily instruction to the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. And Khanmigo will do this for them. And Khanmigo, the price of Khanmigo comes with professional development for teachers on how to leverage AI in their lesson planning, and that is a critical skill.
No more questions, we'll move on. Thank you all so much, and honestly, thank you for being timely with this and understanding what was needed, because I'm sure our districts are very grateful to have this guidance. So, thank you. We have 2 items on first read. SLA 1 is a policy Ms. Sharpton.
Yes, I am so sorry, but we've had to bring this back to you all. There was an error. We had put both LEAs in charter. We had put PSUs, and it turns out we were promptly notified that only LEAs have to do this and not charter schools. So we made that change, as well as a few others that legal had initially not wanted. Anyway, we just had to update it. I apologize.
Any questions about that? Thank you. SLA 2 is a 2024 invitation to submit instructional materials / textbooks for evaluation and adoption in North Carolina for K-12 sites.
Good afternoon. My name is Amy Hopgood, and I am with the Office of Digital Learning and Tech Services at DPI. And with me today, I have Deepak Sharma, who works to support the work of the Textbook Commission. Give them a wave. So it is time for the adoption process once again this year. Last year, you did not have to approve an invitation for bid because we did not adopt any new textbooks last year. So this year, just as a review of where we are in the process, we are in the invitation stage. We are looking to adopt science materials using the updated science standards that are currently in the installation phase of the adoption process. Okay, next. So in front of you now is the tentative schedule for our adoption process, with the goal of having the instructional materials and textbooks ready for board review by October. As stated, we are in the invitation phase of the adoption process, and we have completed the planning phase. We worked with our colleagues in academic standards, and criteria sheets were created. They are available in the invitation to bid beginning on page 23 for your review. This is where we are now in the invitation phase, where we are providing an updated invitation for your approval today. Next, we will enter the evaluation phase. During this time, we will collect bids in April for evaluation. Advisors will review the materials and will evaluate them beginning in June. The evaluators are experts within their field, and they will be teachers that will come together to work with the commission to evaluate those materials. As a reminder, if the state board members are contacted by publishers, you are encouraged to forward that communication to our office so that we can respond appropriately. All of our publishers that will be sent the invitation to bid must be registered on the textbook registry. A link to the publishers registry can be found on DPI's website under the textbook adoption process link, and then once again under the information for publishers. So today, presented for the action on first reading, we are presenting the invitation to bid for science instructional materials to support the recently adopted science standards.
All right, any questions on this process and what we're approving today, tomorrow?
Okay.
Hearing none, thank you. That was
Thank you.
very clear, and we understand what we're doing. Thank you so much. We have two action items. The first is SLA 3, which is a state board policy amendment to the use of state designated assessments for the North Carolina teacher evaluation process. Mr. Michael reviewed this with us last month. It basically is using certification and credential exams and performance-based measurements that are used in CTE courses as part of the teacher evaluation process, rather than relying solely on an end-of-course assessment. So this will be added to that, to the process. I don't know if Mr. Michael's here, but I don't think anything has changed. I have not heard any comments on that. So
up and have some further conversation with us about this.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon again. So Dr. Gibbs and I are bringing you kind of an update on our ESSA plan amendment. So you'll remember back in January, Dr. Howard came to the board with some proposed recommendations around moving our long-term goals, adjusting those, and then submitting an amendment to the U.S. Department of Education to change those long-term goals. After some internal and external conversations, we thought it would be more prudent to hold on those recommended changes until we could do a broader ESSA, ESSA amendment in later in the year. And so in working with Dr. Gibbs, so Dr. Jordan, Dr. Gibbs and I, our teams are all actually working together on this ESSA amendment because it is a whole agency item. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gibbs.
Yeah, and I'll very briefly speak before I send it to Mr. Charles to bring the information, but just to bring the same graphic back to think about how all these things are interdependent. And so when we started to have these conversations about looking much longer than just this immediate what was right now, it made sense to put all these things into context and kind of put those things or triage them one before the other. And so that we do have one remaining item that we do wish to proceed forward with now, and then some of these other things would potentially be addressed in a much more thorough rewrite of the ESSA plan next year. But I'll ask Mr. Charles to bring forward the meat and potatoes. I think in our committee meeting I said Dr. Marr and I both bought just a dinner roll, but Mr. Charles brings the entire main course and the side dishes. So thanks, Alex.
Not sure what kind of dinner he's preparing. It's getting sort of late in the day. We'll go with it. So my goal today is to really just sort of bring and lay out that rationale behind why do we need a larger update to our ESEA state plan, as well as what is before you tomorrow to vote on as far as the small amendment that we do need to enact right now to help get us to where we're going. So my goal is to lay out that groundwork for how do we get to where we are and where are we heading. So first we'll start with some definitions. So ESEA stands for the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. So that act's been around for a while. It has been through several amendments throughout the years, the latest being the Every Student Succeeds Act of 2015. So each iteration holds true to the ESEA and its intended purposes, which is to truly address those educational disparities that exist. And so I bring this up because sometimes you may hear ESEA, sometimes you may hear ESSA or ESSA. They're interchangeable because ESEA is sort of that parent act, whereas ESSA, or the Every Student Succeeds Act, is the current amendment in which we're in. And I'll get more into that in just a little bit. So if you go on, yes, there you go. So within the Every Student Succeeds Act, there are several grant programs. So you just heard it mentioned that this plan really goes across the entire agency. So I'm just going to sort of hit some of the big sort of funded title areas that are involved with this plan. You've got Title I, which the sole purpose there is to remove the barriers incurred from poverty to help increase academic achievement. Also within Title I Part A, that's also where you get the federal school improvement part of it. And so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit at the end, and we'll get more detail on what that school improvement looks like. You've got Title I-C, which is talking about our migratory children. So how do we begin to remove that barrier that gets incurred from being a migratory child within North Carolina or across the nation? Title I Part D looks at our students who are identified as neglected or delinquent, and how do we try to remove that educational barrier that sits before them. Title II Part A is looking at how do we make our teachers the best they can be. So how do we begin to equip our teachers so that they can best educate our children in the classrooms? Title III Part A is looking at how do we move the barrier of having English as a second language. Title IV Part A looks at it a little bit differently, and it looks at how do we begin to expand our programs. So not just looking at how do we look at raising the bar from the bottom, but how do we raise the bar at the top? So how do we begin to truly encourage our students to push beyond where they are and think and grow our programs? Title IV Part B is our 21st Century Community Learning Programs, which are before and after school programs, competitive grants. Title V Part B is looking at our rural and lower income. So how do we give aid and flexibility to our most rural districts so that they can best educate the students? And of course, Title VII Part B is our McKinney-Vento, looking at our homeless students experiencing homelessness. So as with any plan, it's always a good practice to revisit the plan every few years. This has happened at the national level. You may have heard of No Child Left Behind in the past. So that was a previous iteration of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So No Child Left Behind went away. It was revisited and now came around as the Every Student Succeeds Act. It's always good practice to go back and revisit what the plan is, where you stand, and how to move forward, that continuous improvement model. So that's really what we're proposing today. Our current plan was enacted in 2017 when ESSA came into play. When it became law, became enacted, that's when our current plan was written. And we've done some minor, small changes across the way, but we've not done a true revisiting of the entire plan. And so that's really what we're angling to do over the course of the next year. And so the point of today is to make you guys aware of that, to bring you on board with the timeline, and just know that throughout this process, we will keep you up to date on those conversations, where we're going, how we're doing, and of course, we'll be coming back to you for approval before we submit to the U.S. Department of Education for ultimate approval. But that brings me to the first point on this timeline, which is why we're here at this meeting today, is that there is one piece that we do need to go ahead and amend at this point. And so let me walk into a little detail as to why that amendment is necessary. So currently the way it is, within our school improvement at the federal level, we have two main categories. We have CSI, or Comprehensive Support and Improvement Schools, and we have TSI, or Targeted Support and Improvement Schools. Up underneath that, there are 3 designations of CSI schools and 2 designations of TSI schools. So there's 5 total designations of school improvement schools. Within our current model, we fund CSI schools. So our CSI schools get some funding, and within there we have a subset of CSI schools which we call IPG schools. So currently right now that looks at about 133 schools that are currently getting funded with our set aside. This is a mandatory 7% set aside, so we can't adjust that. It's set by law as to you can only do 7%, you can't go above it, can't go below it, it has to be 7%. And so that's what goes toward funding these schools. With that, because we have to have identification years, it's a 3-year identification, and then you have an exit year. We went a couple years during the COVID times where we didn't have data. And so what's happened is it's thrown off our exit and identification years by 1 year. And so where we're running into is come next year, and I got some graphics that'll make this a little more clear, but come next year, we're running into we're still in year 3 of the current cycle, but we're also set to re-identify brand new schools. And so what we run the risk at now is almost doubling the amount of schools that we have on our list, which is going to pretty much cut the funding for the current schools in half. So it's a resource allocation type question, as well as we're getting ready to go through this whole year-long process of looking at our entire plan, looking at the supports we're giving to the schools, looking at how we're supporting across the agency. So it's also a good idea if we can move that out by 1 year, we can keep the resources stable, we can support the current schools through their cycle, and now we align our new re-identification year with the same time that we're implementing the changes that we may make to the state plan. And so let's look at what that looks like. So this is the actual verbiage that is in the state plan. So this is the more technical language here, but on the next slide, what you're going to see is it sort of in writing. So the red box indicates the way we currently are right now. So when you see the years in gray, that basically means sort of business as usual. So we identified in the blue, and like I said, that'd be year 1. So you can see next year we're going to be in year 3 of the current identification. Oh, but what is that? That's another blue box. We're going to try to identify another set of schools to begin that same time. So what are we asking for? So the next slide shows what we're asking for, which is if we push that out by 1 year, we are now applying the exit criteria and the identification criteria in the 25-26 school year, so now we have alignment. So we aren't trying to identify 2 cohorts of schools in the same time frame. We're allowing this cohort to finish out, and we're allowing to start fresh in that 25-26 school year. So that is the request in a nutshell. We did take this out for public comment for 30 days, and we got 1 comment that said, "We agree." That's pretty much what it said. And so
Well County schools?
Well, no, it was not Caldwell County. But that's our request, is that what you'll be voting on tomorrow is going to be that realignment of CSI, TS identifications so that we can have the exit and the identification year within the same year, which will be the 25-26 school year. So any questions?
So I think this makes complete sense, but I do have a question about why we think the number of schools we might have identified would double.
Because over the course of time, you begin to see movements in schools. And so with these, you have very definite definitions. So CSI is going to be always the bottom 5% of all Title I schools. What the bottom 5% of Title I schools 2 years ago, there's going to be maybe a little bit of overlap. That's why it's not really triple, because there's different identifications, but you're going to see a lot more schools being identified. And if we ran the numbers, like if we use last year's data, we'll be going from like 133 to about 216, if my memory's correct, as far as numbers. So you're looking at bottom 5%. You're also looking at any high school who does not graduate at least 2/3 of their population. You're also looking at, in that case, TSI schools who did not exit after 6 years. They would then come over and become CSI, which means they're now part of the funding application as well.
That's more helpful.
And so you begin to see a lot more moving pieces. And so by doing this, it helps us to align that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I know it's a little confusing, but it's going to make a huge difference. So, and some of you may have recognized some of what Dr. Gibbs talked about from an earlier presentation, so all of this is linked. All right, Chair Davis, we are going to defer the discussion item SLA 5 to tomorrow. And finally, we have one consent item, which is SLA 6, a report to the North Carolina General Assembly on cursive and multiplication tables. I think that's fairly obvious that each year we have to have this report, which lists the compliance of each LEA with the requirements regarding cursive writing and the memorization of multiplication tables. And that concludes our discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. That concludes our discussions and open session for today. I'll ask for a motion to go into close in just a moment. We will not be returning to open session after our closed session, but we will be convening tomorrow, Thursday, March 7th, promptly at 9 a.m. Is there a motion to go into closed session? Vice Chair Duncan.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I move that we go into closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute Section 143-318.11A, 1, 3, and 6. And to prevent the disclosure of information that is privileged or confidential pursuant to North Carolina General Statute Sections 115C-319 and -321 and Section 132-6.1C et sec. To consider the qualifications, competence, performance, or condition of appointment of public officers or employees or prospective public officers or employees, and to consult with our attorneys in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorneys and the public body, including a discussion of the following pending cases: Minnick versus North Carolina State Board of Education, Toomer versus North Carolina State Board of Education, Northeast Raleigh Charter Academy doing business as Torchlight Academy versus Torchlight Academy Schools, Phillips versus North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, Alston versus North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, and finally AB versus North Carolina School for the Deaf.
Motion by Vice Chair Duncan. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Blackburn. Any discussion? Mr. Fafari.
Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Kamnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tippin Rogers? Mr. Blackburn?
Yes.
Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell? Lieutenant Governor Robinson? Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes, motion carries. Let's be in closed session at 4:45.